They say every life has a price. On a rain-soaked frontier night in 1867, Eliza Monroe learned hers was $300. $300 for a woman who'd just given birth in chains. $300 for a mother whose child's first cries mixed with the jeers of drunken men. $300. And the quiet voice of a stranger who changed everything. This is the story of a woman sold like cattle, a cowboy who saw her humanity, and the brutal fight for freedom that followed. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Because some stories deserve to be heard everywhere. The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the auction yard into a churning sea of mud and misery. Eliza Monroe could barely stand. Her legs trembled beneath her weight, and the iron shackles around her ankles bit into skin already raw and bleeding. The pain radiating from her abdomen was unlike anything she'd ever known. Worse than the lash, worse than hunger, worse than the years of degradation that had brought her to this moment. Because 2 hours ago, in the filthy holding pen behind the auction house, she had given birth. There had been no midwife, no clean water, no gentle hands to guide the child into the world. Just Eliza, alone in the darkness, biting down on a strip of leather to keep from screaming, her hands cuffed behind her back until the very last moment when the elderly woman in the adjacent pen had convinced the guard to show mercy. The baby had come in a rush of agony and blood, and Eliza had barely managed to catch her daughter before she hit the ground. Her daughter, so small, so perfect, so utterly doomed. Now, as rough hands shoved her toward the auction platform, Eliza clutched the infant to her chest with arms that could barely hold themselves up. The baby was wrapped in Eliza's torn underskirt, the only cloth available. Blood still soaked through Eliza's dress, leaving a dark trail in the mud behind her. "Get up there, girl!" The auctioneer's assistant, a gap-toothed man named Roscoe, grabbed her arm and hauled her forward. Eliza's vision swam. Her knees buckled, but Roscoe caught her roughly, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Don't you dare fall! Mr. Pettigrew wants premium price for you, and he ain't gonna get it if you collapse." Premium price. The word should have made Eliza laugh, if she'd had the strength for it. Premium price for a woman who'd been worked half to death on the Pettigrew plantation, who'd been starved and beaten and used in ways she tried desperately not to remember. Premium price for someone who might not survive the night. The platform rose before her, slick with rain, illuminated by torches that sputtered and smoked in the downpour. Beyond it, a crowd of perhaps 40 men waited, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats and upturned collars. Eliza had been to enough auctions to know what she'd see in those faces. Calculation, greed, lust, indifference. Never compassion, never humanity. Roscoe shoved her up the steps. Eliza's foot slipped on the wet wood and she went down hard on one knee, her body instinctively curling around the baby to protect her from the impact. Pain exploded through her pelvis. A cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. The crowd laughed. "Clumsy one, ain't she?" someone called out. "Maybe she's drunk," another voice added, prompting more laughter. Eliza forced herself upright, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. Don't show them weakness. Don't let them see you break. She'd learned that lesson years ago, during her first auction, when she was just 16 and still foolish enough to cry. Tears only made the men bid higher. Tears meant you were breakable, trainable, controllable. The auctioneer, a portly man with mutton chops and a voice like gravel, stepped forward and raised his hands for silence. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, we have a special offering tonight. This here is Eliza, property of Mr. Augustus Pettigrew of the Pettigrew estate, 24 years of age, healthy and strong." "She don't look strong," someone interrupted. "She looks half dead." "Temporary condition," the auctioneer countered smoothly. "As you can see, she's just produced a fine, healthy child, which proves her fertility and confirms her value as breeding stock." Breeding stock. Eliza's stomach turned. The baby stirred against her chest, making small mewing sounds. "The child ain't included in the sale," the auctioneer continued. "Mr. Pettigrew will retain ownership of the infant. However, he's willing to negotiate a separate price for those interested in keeping mother and child together." A separate price. Of course. Eliza's arms tightened around her daughter. She'd known this was coming, had known since the moment she realized she was pregnant that any child of hers would be property, would be sold, would be torn from her arms eventually. But knowing hadn't prepared her for the reality of it. Nothing could have prepared her for this. "Let's start the bidding at $100, the auctioneer announced. Silence. The rain drummed on the platform roof, a steady percussion that filled the absence of voices. The auctioneer's smile faltered. "Gentlemen, I assure you, this is a fine specimen. Once she's recovered from childbirth, She's bleeding all over your platform, Harris," a voice called out. "How do we know she ain't dying?" "She survived childbirth, didn't she? That's proof enough of her constitution." More silence. Eliza swayed on her feet, barely hearing the exchange. The world had narrowed to the small, warm weight in her arms, the rapid beating of her own heart, and the cold certainty that these were her daughter's last moments in her embrace. $50, someone finally offered, his tone bored. $50? The auctioneer looked personally offended. "Gentlemen, this woman is worth far more than—" "60, another voice cut in. "75. 80. The bidding continued, but it was lackluster, reluctant. Eliza recognized the pattern. They were waiting for her to collapse, to prove the skeptics right. And the truth was, she might. Her vision kept blurring at the edges. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Only her grip on the baby remained strong, fueled by a desperation that transcended physical weakness. $100, the auctioneer said hopefully when the bidding stalled at 95. "Surely someone—" "I'll give you 200. The voice came from the back of the crowd, quiet but carrying clearly through the rain. Every head turned. Eliza blinked, trying to focus on the speaker, but all she could make out was a tall silhouette standing apart from the main group near the edge of the torchlight. 200? The auctioneer perked up immediately. "Well now, that's more like it. Do I hear 225? 250, the quiet voice said. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unusual. Most buyers started low and worked their way up reluctantly. This man was driving the price up himself. "Excellent. Do I hear 300? The crowd fell silent. $300 was serious money, more than most field hands would earn in 2 years. For a woman in Eliza's condition, it was unheard of. $300. The auctioneer could barely contain his glee. Going once! Eliza stared at the shadowy figure. Who was he? Why was he doing this? Going twice! The rain intensified and lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the stranger for just a moment. Eliza caught a glimpse of a weathered face beneath a wide hat, eyes that seemed to look directly at her, not through her, not at her body, but at her. "Sold!" The auctioneer's hammer came down with a crack. "To the gentleman in the back for $300. The crowd erupted in conversation, some men laughing, others shaking their heads at the fool who'd just overpaid so dramatically. Roscoe appeared at Eliza's side, grabbing her arm to lead her down from the platform. "Wait," Eliza gasped. "My baby?" "Mr. Pettigrew wants to see his property," Roscoe said, already reaching for the infant. "No!" Eliza twisted away, nearly losing her balance. "Please, just let me say goodbye. Hand over the child, girl, or I'll take it by force." Eliza looked down at her daughter's tiny face, at the eyes that hadn't yet learned to focus, at the mouth that moved in instinctive searching for milk. Eliza's body wasn't yet producing. This was it, the last moment. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead, breathing in her scent, memorizing the weight of her, the warmth, the absolute perfection of her existence. "I love you," Eliza whispered. "I love you, and I'm so sorry." Roscoe's hands closed around the baby. Eliza's arms were empty. The cold air rushed in where warmth had been. Somewhere deep inside her chest, something broke with such finality that she thought she might actually die from it. "Move," Roscoe ordered, pushing her toward the steps. Eliza moved. She had no choice. She never had a choice. The crowd parted as she descended, still shackled, still bleeding, now utterly empty. She barely registered the faces around her, the comments, the leers. None of it mattered anymore. Nothing mattered. Then she saw him, the man who'd bought her. He stood waiting at the edge of the auction yard, tall and broad-shouldered, his face still shadowed by his hat. As she approached, escorted by Roscoe, he He stepped forward into the torchlight. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth. His face was weathered from sun and wind, his jaw strong beneath several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray-blue, like a winter sky, and holding an expression she couldn't quite identify. Not lust, not cruelty. Something else. Something that made her deeply uneasy because she didn't recognize it. "Here she is," Roscoe announced. "One woman, as purchased. Mr. Pettigrew will need payment before you leave." The stranger looked at Eliza for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her face down to her shackled ankles and back up. Then he turned to Roscoe. "Why is she in chains?" Roscoe blinked. "Sir?" "The shackles. Why is she wearing them?" "Well, she's property, sir. We can't have her running off. I just paid $300 for her. She's my property now. Remove the shackles." Roscoe's mouth opened and closed. That is, Mr. Pettigrew requires that all sales remain bound until they're off the premises. I don't care what Pettigrew requires." The stranger's voice remained quiet, but there was steel beneath it now. "I paid for her. She's mine. Remove the shackles, or I'll do it myself and send Pettigrew a bill for my trouble." Roscoe looked between the stranger and Eliza, clearly calculating whether this was worth an argument. Finally, he sighed and pulled a key from his pocket. "If she runs, that's your problem." "I understand." Eliza stood perfectly still as Roscoe knelt and unlocked the shackles around her ankles. The iron fell away, clanging against the ground. She'd worn those chains for 6 days, ever since Pettigrew had decided to sell her. The sudden absence of their weight made her feel like she might float away. "Wrist cuffs, too," the stranger said. Roscoe complied, muttering under his breath. When the last restraint fell away, Eliza rubbed her wrists automatically, feeling the raw skin beneath her fingers. "Come with me," the stranger said to her. Not an order, exactly, but not a request either, simply a statement. Eliza followed because she had no alternative. Her legs barely supported her weight. Each step sent fresh waves of pain through her lower body, and she could feel blood trickling down her inner thighs. She needed to lie down. She needed water. She needed her baby. But her baby was gone. The stranger led her to a covered wagon parked at the far edge of the auction yard. It was well maintained, the canvas clean and taut over the wooden frame. A pair of horses stood hitched to it, their heads lowered against the rain. "Get in the back," the stranger said, moving to the rear of the wagon and unfastening the canvas flap. Eliza hesitated. This was the moment, she thought distantly, when whatever he'd really bought her for would become clear. Men didn't pay $300 without expecting a return on their investment. But when she didn't move, he simply gestured again. "Please, you need to get out of this rain before you catch your death." Slowly, painfully, Eliza climbed into the wagon. The interior was dry and relatively clean, containing several crates and barrels, some coiled rope, and a pile of blankets. The stranger climbed in behind her, and Eliza tensed, her heart hammering. He moved past her to one of the crates and opened it, pulling out a folded piece of canvas. "Lie down," he said, spreading it over the wagon bed. "On this, it'll keep the blood from soaking into the wood." Eliza stared at him. "You need to rest," he continued, his tone matter of fact. "And I need to examine you to make sure you're not bleeding internally. I've delivered cattle and horses through difficult births. Human anatomy isn't so different." You want to examine me?" Eliza's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I want to make sure you're not dying," he corrected. "There's a difference." He pulled out another crate, this one containing what looked like medical supplies, clean cloth, a bottle of something clear, a needle, and thread. "I won't touch you more than necessary, and I'll explain everything I'm doing before I do it. But we need to stop that bleeding, and we need to do it now. Understood?" Eliza nodded slowly. She didn't understand any of this, but she was too exhausted and in too much pain to argue. She lowered herself onto the canvas, trying not to cry out, as her body protested the movement. The stranger, her owner, she reminded herself bitterly, moved around the wagon with practiced efficiency, lighting a small lantern that cast warm light over the interior. "I'm going to raise your skirt," he said, not looking at her face, just enough to see the source of the bleeding. Then I'm going to clean the area with this. He held up the bottle. It's going to hurt, but it'll prevent infection. True to his word, he explained each step before performing it. He was neither rough nor unnecessarily gentle, his hands impersonal and efficient. Eliza stared at the canvas ceiling, focusing on breathing through the pain as he worked. You're torn, he said after a moment. Not badly, but enough to need stitches. The bleeding is heavy but not critical. You'll survive this. Eliza said nothing. Survival had never been the question. The question was whether survival was worth it. The stranger cleaned and stitched with the same efficiency he'd shown in everything else. Eliza bit down on her lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood. When he finished, he pulled her skirt back down and covered her with a blanket. There, he said. You should rest now. We have a long journey ahead of us. Where? Eliza managed to ask. My ranch. 3 days' ride from here, up in the high country. 3 days. 3 days away from the only place that might hold her daughter. Panic surged through Eliza's exhaustion. My baby. I know, he said quietly. He moved to sit near the wagon opening, his back to her, giving her privacy. I asked about her. And? Pettigrew already sold her, to a couple heading east. They left an hour ago. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. Already sold. Already gone. She'd known it would happen, had known from the moment of her daughter's birth, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. Did they... Eliza's voice broke. Did they seem kind? The stranger was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he finally admitted. I'm sorry. Eliza closed her eyes, hot tears sliding down her temples into her hair. She wanted to scream, to rage, to tear the world apart with her bare hands. But she had no strength for any of it, so she just lay there, trembling, while grief consumed her from the inside out. What's your name? The stranger asked after a while. Eliza. Her voice sounded hollow. Eliza Monroe. Eliza Monroe, he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. I'm Caleb Holt. She didn't respond. What was there to say? Nice to meet you. Thank you for purchasing me. The entire situation was so absurd, so horrific, that social niceties seemed meaningless. I'm going to settle the bill with Pettigrew, Caleb said, standing. Then we'll leave. Try to rest. He dropped from the wagon and disappeared into the rain, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and her grief. Rest. As if rest were possible. As if she could close her eyes and not see her daughter's face. As if the absence in her arms didn't scream louder than any sound. But her body, pushed far beyond its limits, had other ideas. Despite everything, Eliza felt her eyes growing heavy. The pain medication Caleb had given her, she hadn't even noticed him administering it, was pulling her down into darkness. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was a question. What kind of man pays $300 for a woman he doesn't intend to use? What? When Eliza woke, the wagon was moving. The rocking motion sent fresh waves of pain through her body, but it was bearable now, dulled by whatever medicine Caleb had given her. Pale morning light filtered through the canvas, telling her that hours had passed. The rain had stopped. She pushed herself upright slowly, biting back a groan. Every muscle in her body ached. The stitches pulled uncomfortably, and her breasts had begun to swell with milk her daughter would never drink. The thought brought fresh tears, but Eliza blinked them back. She'd cried enough. Tears changed nothing. You're awake. Eliza looked toward the front of the wagon. Caleb sat on the driver's bench, his back visible through the gap in the canvas. He hadn't turned around. How long was I asleep? Eliza asked. About 6 hours. We're maybe 20 miles from the auction yard. I wanted to put some distance between us and Pettigrew's territory before stopping. Why? Caleb was quiet for a moment, the reins loose in his hands as the horses plodded steadily forward. Because men like Pettigrew sometimes change their minds about sales, especially when they're drunk and angry. I wanted to make sure we were well clear before he had time for regrets. Eliza absorbed this. You think he might come after me? I think it's better to be cautious. She considered this, then asked the question that had haunted her brief sleep. Why did you buy me? I needed help at the ranch. There are easier ways to get help than spending $300 at an auction. Probably. So why? Caleb sighed, and for the first time, Eliza heard weariness in his voice. Because you looked like you needed someone too. The simplicity of the answer left Eliza speechless. She waited for the rest, the conditions, the expectations, the debt she would now owe. But Caleb said nothing more, just kept his attention on the road ahead. Finally, Eliza spoke again. What do you expect from me? Expect? You paid $300. That's a lot of money. You must want something in return. Caleb was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he might not answer. Then, I expect you to heal, to eat, to regain your strength. After that, if you're willing, I could use help with the household tasks and maybe the garden. I'm not much for cooking or cleaning, and the ranch has gotten away from me in those areas. But that's optional. If you'd rather not, I won't force you. Optional, Eliza repeated flatly. Nothing is optional when you're property. You're not property. You own me. By law, I'm property. Law and morality aren't always the same thing. Caleb's voice hardened slightly. I don't believe in slavery, Eliza. I never have. What I did last night, buying you, it goes against everything I stand for. But I couldn't walk away and leave you there. So you bought me to… what? Free me? Eventually, yes. But freedom papers take time to process, especially out here on the frontier. And in the meantime, you need somewhere safe to recover. My ranch can be that place. No strings attached. Eliza wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly that it terrified her, because hope was the cruelest thing you could give someone who'd learned to live without it. I don't believe you, she said. I don't blame you. Caleb shifted on the bench. I wouldn't believe me either, in your position. All I can do is show you through my actions. Time will prove whether I'm telling the truth. The wagon rolled on, wheels creaking, horses snorting occasionally. Eliza lay back down, staring at the canvas ceiling, trying to reconcile the impossible situation she'd found herself in. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. Of course. At the auction, you bid against yourself. You drove the price up when no one else was bidding. Why? Caleb chuckled, a dry sound. I was angry. Those men were talking about you like you were livestock, making jokes while you stood there bleeding and holding your newborn. I wanted to make them see, to make everyone see, that you were worth more than their contempt. So I paid more than you were worth on paper, to prove a point. What point? That human dignity isn't measured in dollars. Eliza closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. This man, this stranger, had spent a fortune to buy her freedom in the name of dignity. It made no sense. People didn't do things like that. There had to be an angle, a hidden purpose. But as the hours passed and Caleb made no move toward her, no demands, no hints of expectation, Eliza began to wonder if perhaps, impossibly, he might actually mean what he said. They stopped at midday to rest the horses. Caleb helped Eliza from the wagon with careful, impersonal hands, then busied himself with tending to the animals while she saw to her personal needs in the privacy of some bushes. Her body protested every movement, but the pain was manageable now, a constant ache rather than the searing agony of the previous night. When she returned to the wagon, Caleb had laid out a simple meal: bread, cheese, dried meat, and water from a canteen. Eat, he said simply, then moved away to give her space. Eliza ate mechanically, tasting nothing. The food sat heavy in her stomach, but she forced it down anyway. She needed to maintain her strength, needed to be ready for whatever came next. After the meal, they continued on. The landscape gradually changed from flat prairie to rolling hills, the vegetation becoming denser. Caleb pointed out landmarks occasionally, a distinctive rock formation, a creek that flooded every spring, the ruins of an abandoned homestead. Eliza listened but said little, conserving her energy. As evening approached, Caleb guided the wagon off the main road onto a smaller trail that wound through a stand of cottonwood trees. We'll camp here tonight, he said. There's a stream nearby where you can wash if you'd like. The thought of washing away the dried blood and filth was almost overwhelming in its appeal. Eliza nodded. Caleb set up a simple camp with practiced efficiency. A fire for warmth and cooking, the wagon positioned to block the wind, blankets and supplies arranged for comfort. He showed Eliza the path to the stream, handed her a bar of soap and a clean shirt from his pack, then retreated to the opposite side of camp to tend the horses. The water was shockingly cold, fed by mountain snowmelt even in late summer. Eliza stripped off her ruined dress and waded in, gasping at the temperature. But the cold was cleansing, shocking her system back to full alertness. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, washing away blood and dirt and the phantom feeling of being handled like merchandise. The clean shirt Caleb had given her fell to her knees, soft cotton that smelled of wood smoke and sage. It was far too large, clearly his own, but it was clean and dry and far better than the shredded dress she'd left on the bank. When she returned to camp, Caleb had prepared a simple stew. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. After the meal, he spread blankets near the fire. "You take these," he said. "I'll sleep in the wagon bed." "I should sleep in the wagon. You paid—" Eliza. He met her eyes directly for the first time since purchasing her. "I don't care what I paid. You're injured and recovering from childbirth. You get the better sleeping arrangement. That's not negotiable." She wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy, so she simply nodded and lay down, wrapping herself in the blankets. They smelled like him, leather and horses, and something indefinable but not unpleasant. The fire was warm, her stomach was full, her body was clean. She should have felt relief, but all she felt was the crushing absence where her daughter should have been. "Caleb?" she said into the darkness. "Yes?" "Do you have children?" Long silence. Then, "I did. A son. He died 3 years ago. Fever took him in the winter." "I'm sorry." "So am I." More silence. Then Caleb spoke again, his voice rough. "I know what it's like, Eliza, to have your child torn away from you. Maybe not in the same way, but I know the grief. It doesn't go away, but it does become bearable. Eventually." Tears slipped down Eliza's cheeks, hot against her cold skin. She didn't even have a name. "Then give her one. Even if she never knows it, you can carry it with you. Remember her by it." Eliza thought about this, turning it over in her mind. Finally, she whispered, "Grace. Her name is Grace." "Grace," Caleb repeated softly. "It's a beautiful name." Eliza closed her eyes, picturing her daughter's face. Grace. Yes. She would hold that name in her heart, a small light against the darkness. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was something. The fire burned lower. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant and indifferent, and somewhere between grief and exhaustion, Eliza finally slept. A deep, dreamless sleep that carried her through the night into whatever tomorrow might bring. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the trees, and Caleb was already breaking camp. He looked up at her stirring and offered a slight nod. "Morning. How are you feeling?" Eliza took inventory of her body. Sore, yes. Tender in places. But stronger than yesterday. "Better. Good. We'll reach the ranch by tomorrow evening if we make decent time. The roads get rougher from here, but the horses are fresh." They fell into the rhythm of travel, stopping periodically to rest the horses, eating simple meals, covering ground steadily. Caleb didn't press for conversation, and Eliza appreciated the quiet. She was still processing everything, still trying to understand this strange new reality. By evening of the second day, they'd climbed into foothills dotted with pine and aspen. The air was cooler here, cleaner, with a bite that promised autumn wasn't far off. They camped beside a clear-running creek that burbled over smooth stones. After dinner, as twilight settled over the landscape, Eliza finally voiced the question that had been building in her mind all day. "What happens when we reach your ranch?" Caleb looked up from the fire he'd been stoking. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what exactly are you expecting from me? You said I could help with household tasks, but you also said it was optional. So what's my role? What am I supposed to be?" Caleb set down the stick he'd been using as a poker and sat back, considering his words carefully. "You're supposed to be whatever you choose to be, Eliza. If you want to help around the ranch, I'll appreciate it. If you want to rest and heal and do nothing else for months, that's fine too. If you eventually want to leave, once we've sorted out your legal status, I'll help you get wherever you want to go." "That's not how this works," Eliza said, frustration creeping into her voice. You don't spend $300 on someone and then give them complete freedom. I do. Why? What are you getting out of this? Caleb met her gaze steadily. The knowledge that I helped someone who needed help. That's enough. That's insane. Maybe. A slight smile crossed his face. Or maybe I'm just tired of living in a world where we treat people like commodities. Maybe I wanted to do one thing, just one thing that pushed back against that system. Eliza shook her head, still not quite believing. You could have done that without spending a fortune. Could I? If I'd left you on that platform, you would have sold for $95 to some farmer who saw you as breeding stock. Your daughter was already lost to you, but at least I could make sure her mother had a chance at something better. The mention of Grace sent a fresh spike of pain through Eliza's chest. She looked away, blinking back tears. I'm sorry, Caleb said quietly. I shouldn't have brought her up. No, it's... Eliza took a shaky breath. It's fine. She's gone. I need to accept that. But acceptance and moving on are two different things. They are. And no one expects you to move on quickly. Grief takes as long as it takes. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn. Finally, Eliza spoke again. I'll help with the household tasks, and the garden, if you have one. Not because I owe you, though I do, but because I need something to occupy my mind. Idleness will kill me faster than any injury. Caleb nodded. Fair enough, but the moment it becomes too much, you stop. Agreed? Agreed. That seemed to settle something between them. The tension that had been building eased slightly, replaced by a tentative understanding. Eliza wasn't naive enough to trust completely. Trust had to be earned, and Caleb Holt had only had 2 days to earn it. But she was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. For now. The next day dawned clear and cool. They broke camp early and pushed on into increasingly rugged terrain. The trail narrowed, winding through dense forest and across rocky slopes. Caleb handled the wagon with skill, navigating obstacles that would have daunted a less experienced driver. Around mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. There, he said, pointing. Eliza followed his gaze and saw, nestled in a broad valley below, a ranch. It was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy-looking house, a barn, several outbuildings, and extensive fencing that enclosed pastures dotted with cattle. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, a thin trail against the blue sky. Home, Caleb said simply. Home. The word felt foreign to Eliza. She'd never had a home, not really, just places she'd been kept, places she'd worked, places she'd survived. Could this place be different? They descended into the valley as the sun began its slide toward the western peaks. By the time they reached the ranch house, long shadows stretched across the yard. Caleb helped Eliza down from the wagon, and she stood for a moment, taking it all in. The house was larger than it had appeared from the ridge, 2 stories, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. The barn was substantial, clearly built to withstand harsh winters. Everything spoke of care and attention, of a man who took pride in his work. Let me show you inside, Caleb said, carrying her small bundle of belongings, which consisted only of the clean shirt and a few items he'd bought for her at a trading post they'd passed. The interior of the house was clean but Spartan. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Sturdy furniture, a table, chairs, a rocking chair, occupied the space. Doors led to other rooms, and a staircase climbed to the second floor. There are 3 bedrooms upstairs, Caleb said. You can take your pick of the 2 smaller ones. My room is the one at the end of the hall. The door stays closed, and you're welcome to do the same with yours. Eliza nodded, looking around. It's nice. It's functional. I'm not much for decoration. He set her bundle on the table. Why don't you rest while I tend to the horses and unload the wagon? Dinner will be simple tonight. I'm too tired for anything elaborate. I can cook, Eliza offered. You can barely walk. Rest. That's an order. Eliza bristled at the word order, but saw the slight smile playing at the corner of Caleb's mouth and realized he was being intentionally ironic. An order to rest. It was absurd enough to be almost funny. Fine, she said, but tomorrow I start earning my keep. We'll see how you feel tomorrow. Caleb headed outside, leaving Eliza alone in the house. She climbed the stairs slowly, her body protesting each step. The first bedroom she checked was small but comfortable, with a real bed, an actual bed with a mattress and pillows and quilts. Eliza stared at it in disbelief. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept on anything softer than a wooden pallet. She sat on the edge of the bed tentatively, half expecting it to collapse, or for someone to rush in and tell her she had no right to such luxury. But the bed held, and no one came. Slowly, carefully, Eliza lay back, her head sinking into the pillow. The quilt smelled of lavender and sunshine. The mattress cradled her aching body. And for the first time in years, for the first time since Grace's birth, Eliza felt something that might have been the distant cousin of safety. It wouldn't last. She knew that. Nothing good ever lasted. But for this moment, in this room, in this strange house belonging to a strange man who claimed to want nothing from her, Eliza allowed herself to simply rest. Outside, she could hear Caleb moving around, unhitching the horses, the familiar sounds of ranch work. Inside, the house settled around her with small creaks and sighs. Eliza closed her eyes, her hand unconsciously moving to her empty abdomen where Grace had once grown. "I'm still here," she whispered to the absent child. "I'm still here, and I'll remember you every day. I promise." The light faded from the window. The house grew quiet, and Eliza Monroe, sold and bought and freed in the space of 3 days, allowed herself to hope, just a little, that maybe, impossibly, things could be different here. Maybe she could be different here. Maybe this was the beginning of something other than survival. Maybe. The first morning at the ranch, Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of a rooster crowing in the distance. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The auction, the journey, Caleb Holt, and the strange new existence that felt more like a fever dream than reality. She sat up slowly, testing her body's limits. The pain had diminished to a dull ache, and the bleeding had slowed considerably. Her breasts were swollen and tender, milk still coming in for a baby who would never nurse. Eliza pressed her hands against them, willing the pain to be physical only, but it radiated straight to her heart where Grace's absence lived like an open wound. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Eliza, you awake?" Caleb's voice, careful and respectful. "Yes. I've made breakfast. When you're ready, come down. No rush." She heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway. Eliza looked around the room, at the simple dresser, the wash basin with fresh water, the clean towel folded beside it. Someone had placed these things here while she slept. Caleb, she realized. A man who owned her but knocked on her door and gave her time and space and privacy. It made no sense. Eliza washed her face and hands, then made her way downstairs. The kitchen smelled of coffee and frying bacon, scents so normal and domestic that they seemed to belong to someone else's life. Caleb stood at the stove, his back to her, spatula in hand. "Sit," he said without turning around. "Eggs will be ready in a minute." Eliza sat at the table watching him work. He moved with the easy competence of someone long accustomed to caring for himself. When he set a plate before her, eggs, bacon, fresh bread with butter, she stared at it. "Something wrong?" he asked. "This is a lot of food. You need to rebuild your strength. Eat." Eliza picked up her fork, then hesitated. "Aren't you eating?" "Already did. I've been up since dawn." He poured her coffee, added cream without asking if she wanted it, and set the cup beside her plate. "I have work to do in the north pasture today. Fence needs mending before the cattle break through. You're welcome to come along if you're feeling up to it, or you can stay here and rest. Your choice." That word again. Choice. Eliza took a bite of eggs, chewing slowly. They were perfectly cooked, seasoned just right. When was the last time someone had cooked for her? When was the last time she'd eaten food that wasn't scraps or gruel? "I'd like to come," she heard herself say. "If I can help." Caleb studied her for a moment. "You're still recovering. I'm stronger than I look." "I don't doubt that, but there's no shame in resting when you need to." "I need to work," Eliza said firmly. "Sitting idle will drive me mad." Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. He nodded. "All right, but the moment you need to stop, you tell me. Agreed?" Agreed. After breakfast, Caleb showed her around the ranch properly. The barn housed 6 horses, including the 2 that had pulled the wagon. There were chickens in a coop, pigs in a pen, and 2 milk cows in a small paddock near the house. The cattle, maybe 200 head, Caleb estimated, grazed in the larger pastures beyond. "It's a lot for one man," Eliza observed. "It is. I had help until last spring, a couple of ranch hands who worked the place with me, but one got married and moved to town, and the other headed to California chasing gold rumors." Caleb shrugged. "I've been managing alone since then, but it's getting harder. Why I mentioned needing help." They loaded tools and fence posts into a small wagon hitched to a single horse, then set out across the property. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of day that made Eliza understand why people spoke of the West with such longing. Wide open spaces, clean air, mountains rising in the distance like sentinels watching over the valley. The broken fence was about a mile from the house, where several posts had rotted through and the wire sagged dangerously low. Caleb set to work digging out the old posts while Eliza gathered the tools and materials he needed, anticipating what he'd ask for before he spoke. They fell into an easy rhythm, and Eliza found herself relaxing despite her wariness. "You've done this before," Caleb commented as she handed him the post-hole digger at exactly the right moment. "Farm work, mostly. I was raised on a plantation in Missouri before—" She trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. "Before you were sold." "Yes." Caleb drove a new post into the ground with strong, steady strikes. "How old were you?" 16. My mother died of fever and the plantation owner sold off anyone who wasn't directly profitable. I ended up in a textile mill in Tennessee for 2 years, then a household in Arkansas, then—" She shrugged. "Pettigrew bought me 3 years ago, said he needed workers for his fields." "And the father of your child?" Eliza's hand stilled on the wire she was uncoiling. "There was no father, not in any way that matters." Caleb looked at her sharply, reading the truth in her careful non-answer. His jaw tightened, but he only said, "I'm sorry." They worked in silence for a while. Eliza appreciated that he didn't press for details, didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply acknowledged her pain and moved on, giving her the dignity of privacy. By midday, they'd replaced 4 posts and restrung the wire. Eliza's body was protesting, the stitches pulling uncomfortably, but she refused to stop. The physical labor was cleansing somehow, burning away some of the helpless fury that had been building inside her since Grace's birth. Caleb finally called a halt when he noticed her favoring her left side. "That's enough for today. We'll finish the rest tomorrow." "I can keep going." "I know you can, but you shouldn't." He started packing up the tools. "Besides, I'm hungry. Let's head back." Lunch was simple: cold meat, cheese, bread, and apples from the cellar. They ate on the porch, watching the cattle graze in the distance. Eliza found herself studying Caleb when he wasn't looking, trying to understand this man who defied everything she'd learned about how the world worked. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course." "Why do you live out here alone? A man like you, with property and means. You could have a wife, a family." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I did have a family. My wife Sarah and our son Thomas. We built this ranch together, planned to raise him here, maybe have more children." He paused, his voice roughening. "Sarah died giving birth to our second child. The baby didn't survive either. Thomas was only 5. And then 3 years ago, fever took him too, like I told you before. After that—" He shrugged. "I couldn't seem to move forward. Couldn't imagine bringing someone new into this house, into the life Sarah and I had built. So I stayed alone." Eliza absorbed this, understanding now some of what drove him. "I'm sorry for your losses." "And I'm sorry for yours." He met her eyes. "We're both survivors, Eliza. Both trying to figure out how to keep living when the people we love are gone." The observation struck too close to the bone. Eliza looked away, blinking back unexpected tears. "Grace isn't dead." "No, but she's lost to you, which is its own kind of grief." "Do you think—" Eliza's voice caught. "Do you think I'll ever see her again?" Caleb was quiet, and she appreciated that he didn't offer false hope. "I don't know. The frontier is vast, and people move around constantly. But I'll tell you this. If there's ever any way to find her, any trail to follow, I'll help you follow it. That's a promise." Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They sat in silence for a while, two people bound by loss, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the valley. The days that followed established a pattern. Eliza woke early, helped Caleb with breakfast, then worked alongside him on ranch tasks. She fed chickens, collected eggs, milked cows, weeded the sadly neglected vegetable garden behind the house. She cleaned and cooked and mended, throwing herself into domestic tasks with an intensity that kept the grief at bay during daylight hours. Caleb never demanded her help, never expected it, which somehow made Eliza want to give it more freely. He treated her like a partner rather than property, asking her opinion on ranch decisions, listening when she spoke, respecting her boundaries. When she needed space, he gave it. When she needed company, he provided it without being asked. It was disturbing how quickly Eliza began to rely on this routine, this strange domestic normalcy. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Caleb to reveal his true intentions, but days turned into weeks and nothing changed. He remained respectful, kind, and utterly committed to treating her as a free person despite the legal reality. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Eliza was washing dishes when Caleb came in from the barn carrying a wooden box. "I have something for you," he said, setting the box on the table. Eliza dried her hands, eyeing it warily. "What is it?" "Open it and see." She lifted the lid carefully. Inside were fabric, thread, needles, and several spools of ribbon in different colors. Sewing supplies, enough to make several garments. "You've been wearing my shirt this whole time," Caleb said. "Figured you might want something that actually fits. There's a general store catalog in there too, if you want to order ready-made clothes, but I thought you might prefer to make your own." Eliza stared at the supplies, emotion welling up in her throat. It was such a simple thing, such a basic kindness, but it unmade her completely. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back tears. "Eliza, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she managed. No one's ever—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Caleb's expression softened. "They're just sewing supplies, Eliza." "No?" She shook her head. "They're not. They're proof that you see me as a person who deserves to choose her own clothes and make her own decisions, and—" The tears spilled over. "I don't know how to accept this. Any of this. Every kindness you show me feels like a debt I can never repay." "There is no debt." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. When she complied, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Listen to me carefully, Eliza. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not labor, not loyalty, nothing. What I did, buying you, bringing you here, I did for my own conscience, not to put you in my debt. If you choose to stay and help with the ranch, I'm grateful. If you choose to leave once the freedom papers come through, I'll help you go. Either way, you're free. Do you understand?" "I want to understand," Eliza said quietly. "But it's hard to believe. My whole life, every kindness has come with a price. Every gift has been a chain in disguise. Not this time." They sat in silence, the evening light fading through the windows. Finally, Eliza reached out and touched the fabric in the box, feeling its texture. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the supplies. For everything." Caleb nodded, standing. "You're welcome. Now, I'm going to check on the horses one more time before bed. Take your time looking through that." After he left, Eliza pulled out the fabric, a practical calico print in deep blue, soft cotton in cream, and heavier material for work dresses. There was even a length of fine lawn that could be made into undergarments. Caleb had thought of everything, which meant he'd paid attention to what she needed. The realization was both touching and unsettling. That night, Eliza lay awake in her bed, listening to the house settle around her. Down the hall, she could hear Caleb moving around in his room, the floorboards creaking under his weight. She thought about what he'd said, about there being no debt. Could it really be that simple? Could she truly be free here? Free to choose? Free to leave if she wanted? The problem was, she was starting to realize she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that terrified her more than anything else. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Eliza was working in the garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see a rider cresting the hill, A man in his 50s with silver hair and a marshal's badge glinting on his chest. Eliza's blood ran cold. Lawmen meant trouble. They always did. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. Marshal Dawson, this is a surprise. Holt! The marshal dismounted, his eyes scanning the property before landing on Eliza. Heard you made an interesting purchase a few weeks back. Wanted to see for myself. News travels fast. It does when you spend $300 at a frontier auction. Dawson's gaze remained fixed on Eliza. That her? Eliza stood frozen, her hands clenching in the folds of her borrowed shirt. This was it. This was where Caleb's true intentions would be revealed. The lawman would take her back, or Caleb would assert his ownership, or, her name is Eliza Monroe, Caleb said calmly. And yes, she's staying here while we process her freedom papers. Dawson's eyebrows rose. Freedom papers? Holt, you do know that slavery is still legal in these territories? I'm aware. I'm also aware that I have the right to free anyone I own, provided the paperwork is properly filed. Which can take months, years even. Then it takes years. Caleb's voice hardened. But it will happen. The marshal studied them both for a long moment. Then he surprised Eliza by smiling. Relax, both of you. I'm not here to cause trouble. Actually, I'm here to help. Help how? Caleb asked cautiously. You're not the only one who thinks this whole system is rotten, Holt. I've been looking for ways to speed up the manumission process for cases like this. And I think I found one. He pulled a folded document from his saddlebag. This is a territorial exemption form. If you file it with the court, along with a notarized statement of intent to free, it can bypass some of the usual waiting periods. Caleb took the document, scanning it quickly. This is legitimate? As legitimate as anything in this territory. Won't make her free overnight, but it'll cut the process down to a few months instead of years. Dawson looked at Eliza. You understand what this means, Miss Monroe. Once this is filed, you'll be in a kind of legal limbo. Not quite free, not quite enslaved. Some people might try to take advantage of that. Eliza found her voice. People have been taking advantage of me my whole life, Marshal. At least this way there's an end in sight. Dawson nodded approvingly. Smart woman. Holt, you'll need to get this notarized in town. I'd recommend doing it soon before anyone gets ideas about challenging your ownership. Like who? Caleb's tone sharpened. Like Augustus Pettigrew. Dawson's expression darkened. Word is he's been drinking heavily since your purchase. Saying you made him look like a fool, drove up the price just to humiliate him. Man like that, with that much pride, he might try to cause problems. Eliza's stomach dropped. She'd thought she was safe here, far from Pettigrew's reach. But if he came looking for her, if he tried to reclaim her... Let him try, Caleb said coldly. I have a bill of sale, properly witnessed and recorded. He has no legal claim. Legal claim and actual claim are two different things on the frontier, Holt. You know that as well as I do. Dawson mounted his horse. Just be careful, both of you, and get those papers filed soon. After the marshal left, Eliza and Caleb stood in the yard, the weight of the warning settling over them. He won't come here, Caleb said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. Pettigrew is a coward. He only strikes when he has overwhelming force on his side. You don't know him like I do, Eliza said quietly. When he drinks, he gets mean. And when he gets mean, he doesn't care about consequences. Caleb looked at her, seeing the fear she was trying to hide. Then we'll be ready. I'll ride to town tomorrow and file the papers. And I'll make sure we have guns loaded and accessible, just in case. You'd fight for me? The question slipped out before Eliza could stop it. Yes, Caleb said simply. I would. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept imagining Pettigrew's face, his hands, the way he'd looked at her with such contempt when he'd ordered her sold. He was a man who didn't like losing, and Caleb had made him lose publicly. That kind of humiliation demanded retribution. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. To her surprise, Caleb was there, sitting at the table with a rifle across his lap, cleaning it methodically. Couldn't sleep either, he asked without looking up. No. Eliza sat across from him, watching his hands work. Are you really going to fight if he comes? Yes. Why? I'm not worth dying for. Caleb looked up sharply. Don't say that. It's true. You barely know me. I'm just... You're a human being who deserves dignity and freedom, Caleb interrupted. That's worth fighting for, worth dying for if it comes to that. But it shouldn't have to come to that. I could just leave, disappear. Then you'd be safe, and Pettigrew would have no reason to come after you. And where would you go? You have no money, no papers, no way to survive on your own out here. Caleb set down the cleaning cloth. Besides, I made you a promise. I told you this was a safe place, that you were free here. I don't break my promises. Eliza felt tears prickling her eyes again. This man, this impossible man, was willing to risk everything for her. It made no sense. It defied every lesson she'd learned about human nature. I don't understand you, she whispered. I don't need you to understand me. I just need you to trust me. He met her eyes. Can you do that? Eliza thought about the past 3 weeks, about the locked doors he'd never tested, the boundaries he'd never crossed, the promises he'd kept, about the way he treated her like a person, not property, about the sewing supplies and the freedom papers and the simple radical act of asking for her trust instead of demanding her submission. Yes, she said finally, I can trust you. Something eased in Caleb's expression. Good. Now go back to bed and try to rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Eliza climbed the stairs slowly, Caleb's words echoing in her mind. Trust. Such a fragile, dangerous thing. But for the first time in her life, she thought maybe, just maybe, it was safe to try. The trip to town the next day was tense. Caleb insisted Eliza come with him, saying it was safer than leaving her alone at the ranch. They took the wagon, with a rifle within easy reach and Caleb's pistol holstered at his hip. The town of Clearwater was small, just a main street lined with weathered buildings and false-fronted shops. People stopped to stare as they passed, eyes lingering on Eliza. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to show fear. The courthouse was a squat brick building at the end of the street. Inside, a clerk with spectacles and ink-stained fingers looked up from his ledger. Help you? I need to file manumission papers, Caleb said, producing the documents Marshal Dawson had provided. The clerk's eyebrows rose as he scanned the forms. This is a territorial exemption. Where'd you get this? From someone who knows how to use it. Can you file it or not? The clerk hesitated, then shrugged. I can file it, but you'll need a notary to witness your signature, and that'll cost you $5. Fine. The process took an hour, filled with bureaucratic ritual and careful documentation. Eliza stood silent throughout, trying to believe that these pieces of paper would actually change her life. When the clerk finally stamped the final document and handed Caleb a receipt, Eliza felt something shift inside her. Not freedom, not yet, but the possibility of it. As they left the courthouse, a voice called out from across the street, Well, well, if it ain't the high-minded Mr. Holt. Eliza's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. A man detached himself from the shadows of a saloon doorway. He was in his 40s, with a florid face and the thick build of someone who'd lived well at others' expense. Augustus Pettigrew. Caleb's hand moved to his pistol. Pettigrew. Heard you were in town. Thought I'd come say hello. Pettigrew's eyes slid to Eliza, and his smile turned cruel. And to see my former property. Looking well, girl. Ranch life agrees with you. She's not your property anymore, Caleb said flatly. No, she's yours for now. Pettigrew sauntered closer, reeking of whiskey even at this early hour. But I've been thinking. That sale might not have been entirely legal. I was drunk, you see. Couldn't have been thinking clearly when I accepted your bid. You were sober enough to take my money. Details. Pettigrew waved a hand dismissively. Point is, I'm considering challenging the sale. Getting my property back. The sale is recorded and legal. You have no grounds. Maybe, maybe not. Frontier law is flexible, Holt, especially when the right people are persuaded. Pettigrew's smile widened. How much did you really pay for her? $300? I'll give you $400 to sell her back to me. Right now. That's a $100 profit for a few weeks' use. Eliza's hands clenched into fists. Use, as if that's all she'd been doing here. She's not for sale, Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. Everything's for sale. Name your price. There is no price. She's a human being, not livestock. Pettigrew laughed, a harsh sound that drew attention from passers-by. Human being? She's a slave, Holt. Property. And you're a fool if you think some paperwork is going to change that. The paperwork is already filed. In a few months, she'll be legally free. So whatever you're planning, you're too late. The smile dropped from Pettigrew's face, replaced by cold rage. You think you're better than me? You think you're some kind of savior? You're not. You're just a lonely widower who bought himself a woman because you can't get one any other way. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. We're done here. Come on, Eliza. He took her arm gently, guiding her toward the wagon. Pettigrew called after them. This isn't over, Holt. I'll see you ruined for this. You and that whore both. Caleb spun, and for a moment Eliza thought he might actually draw his gun. But he just stared at Pettigrew with such contempt that the other man actually took a step back. If you come near my ranch, Caleb said, each word deliberate and cold, I will defend my property and everyone on it. By any means necessary. Remember that before you do something stupid. They climbed into the wagon and left, but Eliza could feel Pettigrew's eyes boring into her back the entire way. The ride home was silent, tension crackling between them. When they finally reached the ranch, Caleb helped Eliza down and then started unhitching the horses, his movements sharp and angry. I'm sorry, Eliza said. Caleb looked at her in surprise. For what? For causing this. For bringing his anger down on you. Eliza, none of this is your fault. Pettigrew is angry because I exposed him for what he is, a petty, cruel man who treats people like objects. He'd be angry at anyone who challenged him. But now he's threatening you because of me. Let him threaten. I've faced worse than Augustus Pettigrew. Caleb finished with the horses and turned to her fully. Listen to me. I knew what I was doing when I bought you. I knew it might have consequences, and I'd do it again, without hesitation. So stop apologizing for existing, for needing help, for being human. You have nothing to be sorry for. Eliza nodded, though the guilt still sat heavy in her chest. They went about the evening chores in silence, both lost in thought. At dinner, Caleb was quiet, and Eliza could see him working through scenarios, making plans. You're worried he'll actually come, she said finally. I'm being cautious. There's a difference. What will we do if he does? Caleb looked at her seriously. If he comes with the law, which he can't because the sale was legal, we show them the paperwork. If he comes with hired guns, he paused, then we defend ourselves. You know how to shoot? No? Then tomorrow, I teach you. The next morning, Caleb set up targets behind the barn, old bottles and tin cans balanced on fence posts. He showed Eliza how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. The first shot knocked her backward, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. The second went wide. But by the 10th shot, she was hitting the targets with increasing regularity. Good, Caleb said, nodding approval. You're a natural. Or desperate, Eliza said, reloading. Desperation can be a powerful teacher. They practiced for an hour each day after that, until Eliza could reliably hit what she aimed at. Caleb taught her to load and clean the weapons, to recognize when they were about to jam, to shoot from different positions. It was practical knowledge, necessary knowledge, but it also made the threat feel more real. A week passed. Then 2. No sign of Pettigrew. Eliza began to hope that maybe his threats had been empty, fueled by liquor and wounded pride but lacking real follow-through. She settled deeper into life on the ranch. She sewed herself 2 work dresses and 1 nicer outfit for town trips, hemming them carefully and taking pride in the fit. She expanded the garden, planting late-season crops that would mature before the first frost. She learned the rhythms of the cattle, the personalities of the horses, the way the light changed as autumn approached. And slowly, carefully, she learned to trust Caleb Holt. It showed in small ways, the way she no longer flinched when he moved suddenly, the way she started offering opinions without being asked, the way she sometimes laughed at his dry observations about ranch life. She started calling him Caleb instead of Mr. Holt, started meeting his eyes instead of keeping her gaze downcast. One evening, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the mountains. It had become their routine, this quiet companionship at day's end. Can I ask you something? Eliza said. Always. Why didn't you ever remarry? After your wife died, I mean. Surely women in town would have. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Some did show interest, but I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, I just felt tired. Tired of hoping, tired of risking loss again. Easier to be alone. Is it? Eliza asked softly. Easier? No, he admitted. It's lonelier, but it feels safer. I understand that. They sat in silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to emerge, bright and endless. Eliza, Caleb said eventually, I want you to know that whatever happens, whether Pettigrew comes or not, whether the Freedom Papers process quickly or slowly, you have a place here, for as long as you want it. As what? The question escaped before Eliza could stop it. As your employee, your what? As yourself. As Eliza Monroe, who happens to live here and help with the ranch. He looked at her seriously. I'm not asking for anything more than what we have now. I just want you to know that this is your home, if you choose it to be. Home. That word again. Eliza felt it settling into her bones, taking root despite her fear. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb nodded, returning his gaze to the darkening sky. And Eliza allowed herself to believe just a little more that maybe freedom could be more than a legal status. Maybe it could be this: a porch, a sunset, a man who asked for nothing but gave everything, and the slow, terrifying, wonderful possibility of choosing her own life. The peace lasted exactly 3 more days. Then, on a clear autumn morning, 4 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Eliza saw them first. She was hanging laundry when something made her look up, some instinct honed by years of watching for danger. The rider sat motionless, silhouetted against the bright sky, clearly watching the ranch. Her blood ran cold. Caleb! She dropped the sheet she'd been hanging and ran toward the barn where he was working. Caleb, there are men on the ridge! He emerged immediately, his face hardening when he saw the riders. Get in the house. Now! But now, Eliza. Load the rifles and stay away from the windows. Eliza ran. Her hand shook as she loaded the weapons, the lessons Caleb had taught her coming back through sheer muscle memory. She positioned herself where she could see the yard but remain concealed, watching through a gap in the curtains. The riders descended slowly, deliberately, taking their time. As they drew closer, Eliza's worst fears were confirmed. Augustus Pettigrew rode at their head, flanked by 3 rough-looking men who had the unmistakable air of hired guns. Caleb stood in the yard, unarmed but utterly still, watching them approach. When they were about 20 feet away, he raised his hand. That's close enough, Pettigrew. The riders stopped. Pettigrew smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Holt, we need to talk. We have nothing to discuss. I disagree. See, I've been thinking about our last conversation, about my property, and I've decided I want her back. She's not your property. I showed you the papers. Papers can burn, sales can be contested. Pettigrew's voice hardened. One way or another, I'm leaving here with what's mine. Inside the house, Eliza's grip tightened on the rifle. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading, the moment when the illusion of safety shattered and revealed the truth underneath, that she would never truly be free, that men like Pettigrew always won in the end. But then Caleb spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. You can try, but you'll have to go through me first. And I promise you, Pettigrew, that won't end well for anyone. The confrontation had begun, and Eliza knew with absolute certainty that before it ended, blood would be spilled. The only question was whose. Pettigrew's smile widened into something cruel and predatory. Big words from a man who's outnumbered 4-1. You really want to die over a slave, Holt? She's not a slave. Not anymore. Caleb's voice remained steady, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his hip where his pistol should have been. And if you're planning violence, you should know the marshal's been informed of your threats. Anything happens to me or Eliza, he'll know exactly where to look. Dawson? Pettigrew laughed. That old man talks a good game, but he's got no real authority out here. This is frontier country, Holt. Justice belongs to whoever's got the most guns. One of the hired men shifted in his saddle, and Eliza caught the glint of sunlight on metal. They were all armed, she realized. Rifles, pistols, probably knives, too. Caleb had nothing visible, standing there in the yard like he was waiting for neighbors to arrive for Sunday dinner, instead of facing down men who meant him harm. "Last chance," Pettigrew said, his voice hardening. "Send the girl out, and we'll leave peacefully. Otherwise, things are going to get unpleasant." Inside the house, Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself small and invisible like she'd learned to do over years of survival. But something else stirred beneath the fear, something hot and fierce and absolutely done with running. She thought of Grace, sold and lost before Eliza could even fight for her. She thought of every indignity, every violation, every moment she'd been forced to accept because resistance meant death. She thought of the past weeks at the ranch, of Caleb's quiet respect, of the possibility of freedom, of the person she was beginning to remember she could be. And she made a choice. Eliza stood, rifle in hand, and moved to the window. She didn't hide anymore. She stood fully visible, the barrel resting against the window frame, aimed directly at Pettigrew's chest. "She's not going anywhere," Eliza called out, her voice steady despite the fear. "And if you try to take me, I'll put a bullet through you myself." Every head turned toward the house. Pettigrew's face darkened with rage. "You dare point a gun at me, girl? I'll have you whipped till—" "You'll do nothing," Eliza interrupted, her finger sliding to the trigger like Caleb had taught her. "Because I'm not your property anymore. I'm not anyone's property, and I'm done being afraid of men like you." Caleb's voice cut through the tension. "You heard her. Now get off my land before this escalates." Pettigrew's hand moved to his pistol. "You're making a serious mistake, Holt." "No, you are." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. The morning sun beat down on the yard, birds sang obliviously in the nearby trees, and 5 people stood locked in a tableau of violence waiting to erupt. Eliza's finger trembled on the trigger. She'd never shot at a person before, had barely gotten comfortable shooting at targets. Could she actually do it? Could she take a life? Then one of the hired guns made the decision for everyone. He jerked his rifle up, swinging it toward Caleb. Eliza didn't think. She just reacted. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as she squeezed the trigger, the report deafening in the morning air. The hired gun's horse reared, and the man grabbed for his saddle, his shot going wild into the dirt. "Move!" Caleb shouted, diving behind a water trough as the yard exploded into chaos. Guns fired in rapid succession. Wood splintered around Eliza as she ducked below the window, her hands shaking as she worked to reload. She'd hit the man's horse, not him. Whether by accident or some unconscious mercy, she wasn't sure. But she'd fired, and that changed everything. Outside, Caleb had somehow reached the barn. Eliza saw him emerge with a rifle, using the corner for cover as he returned fire. One of Pettigrew's men cried out and slumped in his saddle, clutching his arm. The horses were panicking now, wheeling and stamping, turning the yard into a maelstrom of dust and confusion. "Get her!" Pettigrew roared, pointing at the house. "Burn them out if you have to!" 2 of the men dismounted, using their horses as shields as they advanced on the house. Eliza's breath came in short gasps. They were coming for her. They were actually coming. She forced her hand steady and raised the rifle again, sighting down the barrel at the nearest man. He was young, maybe 25, with a scraggly beard and mean eyes. He didn't look afraid. He looked excited. Eliza fired. The shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his rifle, cursing viciously. "That's enough!" The second man raised his hands, backing away from his wounded companion. "I didn't sign up for this. Woman's a dead shot." Caleb's voice rang out from the barn. "Smart man! Now get your friend and ride out while you still can." But Pettigrew wasn't done. Red-faced and trembling with rage, he spurred his horse forward, pistol raised. "I'll kill you myself, you self-righteous bastard!" Time seemed to slow. Eliza saw Pettigrew's finger tightening on the trigger, saw the barrel swinging toward Caleb, saw the moment when everything could end. Without thinking, without hesitation, she aimed and fired. The bullet struck Pettigrew's gun hand. His pistol flew from his grip and he howled in pain, blood streaming from his shattered fingers. His horse bolted, nearly throwing him as it galloped in a panicked circle. Caleb stepped out from cover, his rifle trained on the remaining men. Next person who moves gets more than a flesh wound. Drop your weapons. Now. The uninjured gunman complied immediately, his hands shaking as he tossed his pistol and rifle to the ground. The one Eliza had shot in the shoulder did the same, his face pale from shock and pain. Pettigrew clung to his saddle one-handed, his ruined hand cradled against his chest, his face twisted in agony and fury. "You'll pay for this," he gasped. "Both of you. I'll see you hang." "For defending my own property from armed intruders?" Caleb's voice was ice cold. "I don't think so. Now get off my land, all of you. And if I ever see you near this ranch again, Pettigrew, I won't aim for your hand." The hired men needed no further encouragement. They scrambled onto their horses and rode out, the wounded man swaying dangerously in his saddle. Pettigrew followed more slowly, his face gray with pain and shock, but his eyes burned with a hatred that promised this wasn't over. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, silence settled over the ranch like a physical weight. Smoke drifted from the barrel of Eliza's rifle. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she had to set the weapon down before she dropped it. "Eliza?" Caleb's voice closer now. He was at the door. "Can I come in?" She nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. "Yes." He entered slowly, his rifle still in hand, his eyes scanning the room for threats before settling on her. "Are you hurt?" "No. You?" "I'm fine." He set his rifle down and moved toward her carefully, like she was a spooked horse. "That was... Eliza, what you did out there." "I shot him." The words came out flat, disconnected. "I shot Pettigrew. I shot his man. The reality crashed over her like a wave. She'd fired at human beings. She'd drawn blood. She'd done exactly what Pettigrew had always wanted to turn her into. Violent, dangerous, a threat to be controlled. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, the rifle clattering beside her. Caleb was there immediately, kneeling in front of her but not touching, giving her space. "Hey, look at me. Eliza, look at me." She forced her eyes to his face. "You defended yourself," he said firmly. "You defended both of us. That's not wrong. That's not something to be ashamed of." "I could have killed him." "But you didn't. You aimed for his hand, not his heart. Even in the middle of chaos, you chose mercy." Caleb's voice softened. "That takes more courage than killing, Eliza. More strength. You did the right thing." "I don't feel strong. I feel..." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the storm of emotions tearing through her, fear, rage, triumph, guilt, all tangled together into something overwhelming. "Come on." Caleb stood and offered his hand. "Let's get you sitting properly. You're shaking." Eliza let him help her to a chair. Her whole body was trembling now, adrenaline draining away and leaving weakness in its wake. Caleb brought her water and she drank mechanically, tasting nothing. "Will he come back?" she asked finally. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Eventually, maybe, but not today, and probably not with guns. We hurt his pride badly, Eliza. Made him look weak in front of his hired men. He'll want revenge, but he'll be more careful about how he seeks it." "What do we do?" "We stay alert. We keep the weapons loaded. And first thing tomorrow I ride to town and report what happened to Marshal Dawson. Get it on record that Pettigrew attacked us, that we defended ourselves legally." He met her eyes. "But Eliza, you need to understand something. After this, there's no going back. You stood up to him. You fought. Men like Pettigrew, they don't forget that." "I know." Eliza's hands clenched into fists. "But I'm done running, done hiding. If he comes for me again, I'll fight again. I'll keep fighting until either he's gone or I am." Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "Then we fight together. Because you're not alone in this anymore." The words settled over Eliza like a blanket, warm and solid. Not alone. For the first time in her entire life, she wasn't facing danger alone. Someone was standing with her, beside her, not because he owned her or wanted something from her, but because he'd chosen to. Because he believed she deserved protection and dignity and freedom. They spent the rest of the day securing the ranch. Caleb checked every door and window, making sure they could be properly barred. He moved weapons to strategic locations throughout the house. He even rigged a simple alarm system using tin cans and wire that would alert them if anyone approached at night. Eliza helped where she could, but mostly she tried to process what had happened. She'd crossed a line today, one she could never uncross. She'd met violence with violence, had refused to be a victim, had claimed her right to defend herself. The old Eliza, the one who'd survived by making herself small and compliant, was gone. In her place stood someone harder, fiercer, less willing to bend. She wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. But it was done. As evening approached, Caleb cooked dinner while Eliza kept watch from the window. Neither of them had much appetite, but they forced themselves to eat. Strength would be important in the days ahead. "Tell me about your son," Eliza said suddenly, breaking the silence. Caleb looked up, surprised. "Thomas?" "Yes. You said fever took him, but you never talk about what he was like." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Then he set it down and leaned back. "He was 6 when he died. Smart as a whip, always asking questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do stars come from? How do horses know where to walk?" A faint smile crossed his face. Drove Sarah crazy sometimes, all those questions. But I loved it. Loved that he was curious about the world. "He sounds wonderful." He was. He loved this ranch, loved helping with the animals. Every morning he'd follow me to the barn, trying to carry buckets that were bigger than he was. Caleb's voice roughened. The day the fever started, he complained his head hurt. We thought it was nothing. By nightfall, he was burning up. 3 days later, he was gone. Eliza reached across the table and took his hand without thinking. Caleb looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "No parent should have to bury their child." "No, they shouldn't." He squeezed her hand gently. "But we do. We survive it somehow. Just like you'll survive losing Grace. Not forget, never forget, but survive." "How?" The question burst from Eliza. "How do you survive losing someone you love? How do you wake up every day knowing they're gone and keep going anyway?" Caleb considered this carefully. "You find reasons, small ones at first. The cattle need feeding, the fence needs mending, someone else needs help. You string together enough small reasons and eventually they add up to something bigger. A purpose. A life worth living, even in grief." "Is that what I am?" Eliza asked quietly. "One of your small reasons?" "No." Caleb met her eyes directly. "You're one of the bigger ones." The weight of that statement hung between them. Eliza wanted to pull her hand back, to retreat into safety, but she found she couldn't, didn't want to. Something had shifted between them today, forged in gunfire and shared danger. Trust had deepened into something else. Something Eliza wasn't quite ready to name, but could feel taking root nonetheless. "I should check the perimeter once more before dark," Caleb said finally, releasing her hand and standing. "You should rest. It's been a long day." "I'm not tired." "Then pretend. Your body needs to recover from the shock, even if your mind won't let you sleep." Eliza nodded and headed upstairs. But she didn't lie down. Instead, she sat by the window of her room, watching the sun set over the valley, her rifle across her lap. Below, she could see Caleb making his rounds, checking locks and sight lines with methodical thoroughness. The man was preparing for war, she realized. And so was she. Night fell, deep and moonless. Every shadow seemed to hide threats. Every sound made Eliza's heart race. She dozed fitfully in her chair, jerking awake at imagined noises, her hand always on the rifle. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her grip tightened on the weapon before Caleb's voice came softly through her door. "It's just me. I'm going to sleep in the hallway tonight, between your room and the stairs. Just wanted you to know so you don't shoot me." "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I'm doing it anyway. Try to rest, Eliza." She heard him settle onto the floor outside her door, heard the rustle of a blanket being arranged. The man was sleeping on the hard floor to guard her room. The realization brought tears to Eliza's eyes. "Caleb?" she called softly. "Yes?" "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome. Now sleep." This time Eliza did lie down, though she kept the rifle beside her bed. Knowing Caleb was just outside the door, standing watch, made the darkness less threatening. She closed her eyes and eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Caleb was already up when Eliza emerged from her room, his eyes shadowed with fatigue, but his movements as purposeful as ever. "I'm riding to town," he announced. "Should be back by late afternoon. You're going to stay here, doors locked, rifle loaded. Don't open up for anyone except me or Marshal Dawson. Understand? I should come with you. It's safer if you stay here. If Pettigrew's watching the town, I don't want him knowing you're vulnerable on the road." He pulled on his coat. "Besides, someone needs to mind the ranch. Can you handle that?" Eliza nodded, though anxiety gnawed at her. The thought of being alone here, waiting, not knowing if Caleb would return safely, it was almost worse than facing danger directly. "If I'm not back by dark," Caleb continued, strapping on his gun belt, "you barricade yourself in the house, and don't come out until Dawson arrives. Promise me." "I promise." He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Eliza, if something happens to me, don't." "If something happens," he continued firmly, "there's a lockbox under the floorboards in my room. It has money, the deed to this ranch, and signed papers transferring ownership to you. Everything's legal and notarized. You'll be taken care of." Eliza stared at him, speechless. When did you do that?" "Week after you arrived. Just seemed like the right thing to do." He met her eyes. "You deserve security, Eliza, whether I'm here or not." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Eliza watched through the window as he saddled his horse and rode out, heading toward town at a steady pace. Within minutes, he'd disappeared over the ridge, and she was alone. The day stretched endlessly. Eliza tried to occupy herself with chores, feeding the animals, collecting eggs, weeding the garden, but her eyes kept drifting to the ridge, watching for Caleb's return, or for other riders. Every distant sound made her freeze, listening. By noon, the rain arrived, a steady downpour that turned the yard to mud and reduced visibility to a few dozen yards. Eliza retreated to the house, positioning herself where she could watch the approaches. The rifle never left her side. Hours crawled past. 1 o'clock. 2. 3. 4. The rain continued, relentless. 5 o'clock came and went. Still no sign of Caleb. As 6 o'clock approached and the light began to fade, Eliza's anxiety transformed into genuine fear. Something had happened. It had to have. Caleb wouldn't stay in town this late without good reason, unless he couldn't come back. Unless Pettigrew had... No. She refused to complete that thought. At 7 o'clock, with full dark settling over the valley and rain still hammering the roof, Eliza heard hoofbeats. She rushed to the window, rifle raised, heart in her throat. A single rider was approaching through the rain, hunched against the weather. As he drew closer, lightning flickered, illuminating his face. "Caleb." Eliza nearly collapsed with relief. She ran to the door, throwing back the bolt and yanking it open. Caleb stumbled inside, soaked to the bone, his face grim. "What happened?" Eliza demanded, helping him out of his dripping coat. "You're hours late. I thought..." "Pettigrew's in jail," Caleb said flatly. Eliza froze. "What?" "I got to town, filed my report with Dawson. While I was there, the doctor showed up with one of Pettigrew's men, the one you shot in the shoulder. Man was delirious with infection, and the doctor made him talk about what happened. Once Dawson heard that Pettigrew had come to the ranch with armed men, intent on taking you by force, he arrested him." "He's actually in jail? Pettigrew?" "For now. Charged with attempted kidnapping and assault. The hearing's set for next week." Caleb's expression darkened. "But there's more. While Dawson was arresting Pettigrew, one of his other men, the one you spooked off his horse, started talking, drinking and talking. Told everyone in the saloon that Pettigrew had been planning to kill me and burn the ranch. Make it look like an accident." Eliza's blood ran cold. "He was going to kill you?" "If he'd had the chance, yes. Which means yesterday could have ended very differently." Caleb ran a hand through his wet hair. "Dawson thinks the attempted murder charge will keep Pettigrew locked up for months, maybe longer if we're lucky. But his men are still out there, and they're angry." "How angry?" Angry enough that Dawson insisted I wait until the rain started before leaving town, said it would make me harder to follow. He met her eyes. We're not safe yet, Eliza. This isn't over. They stood in the dim kitchen, rain drumming overhead, the weight of continued danger settling over them like a shroud. Eliza thought about running, about taking Caleb's offer of freedom and disappearing into the night. But where would she go? And what kind of person would she be if she abandoned the one man who'd stood by her? Then we stay vigilant, she said firmly. We keep the weapons close. We don't let our guard down. Caleb nodded slowly. You're sure? Because I meant what I said about the lockbox. You could take that money and start somewhere new, somewhere Pettigrew's men would never find you. And leave you to face them alone? No. Eliza's jaw set. You stood up for me when no one else would. You gave me a chance at freedom. I'm not abandoning you now. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, gratitude, warmth, and something deeper that made Eliza's pulse quicken. You're a remarkable woman, Eliza Monroe. I'm a woman who's tired of running. There's a difference. They prepared a simple dinner and ate mostly in silence, both too tired and worried for conversation. But as Eliza washed dishes and Caleb cleaned his rifle, she found herself watching him. This man who'd turned her world upside down, who'd shown her that not all men were monsters, that dignity and respect were possible even in a world built on cruelty. I'll take first watch tonight, Caleb said, interrupting her thoughts. Wake me at midnight and I'll take over. You're exhausted. We both need rest. This way we split it fairly. He smiled faintly. Don't argue. You won't win. Eliza couldn't help a small smile in return. Fine. But if you fall asleep on watch, I reserve the right to say I told you so. Deal. Eliza went upstairs to her room, but found she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with everything that had happened, everything that might still happen. Pettigrew was in jail, but his men weren't, and men with something to prove could be even more dangerous than their boss. Around 11:30, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Caleb was sitting by the window, rifle across his knees, staring out into the rain-soaked darkness. Couldn't sleep either, he asked without turning. Too much thinking. I know the feeling. He shifted over, making room for her to sit beside him. Might as well keep watch together. They sat in companionable silence, watching the storm rage outside. Lightning flickered occasionally, illuminating the yard in brief, stark snapshots. Each flash had Eliza tensing, expecting to see riders approaching, but the yard remained empty. Can I ask you something? Caleb said after a while. Of course. Yesterday, when you shot Pettigrew, how did you know to aim for his hand? That's an incredibly difficult shot, even for an experienced marksman. Eliza was quiet, remembering the moment. I didn't plan it. I saw him aiming at you, and I knew I had to stop him. But I also knew that if I killed him, it would change me into something I didn't want to be. So I aimed for where I could disable him without crossing that line. You succeeded. Remarkably well, I might add. It was luck. No. Caleb turned to look at her. It was skill and compassion working together. That's rare, Eliza, especially in situations like that. You would have done the same. Would I? I'm not sure. In the heat of the moment, with someone I cared about in danger, I might have chosen differently. The phrase, someone I cared about, hung in the air between them. Eliza felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the darkness. I should go up and try to rest, she said, standing abruptly. You need relief by midnight. Eliza. Caleb caught her hand gently. Thank you. For staying, for fighting, for being brave when it mattered most. I'm not brave, I'm just... You are. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Don't diminish that. Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. She withdrew her hand carefully and climbed the stairs, feeling Caleb's eyes on her back. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, her hand tingling where he'd touched it. Something was growing between them, something that went beyond gratitude or shared danger. Something that terrified her almost as much as Pettigrew's threats. Because falling in love with Caleb Holt would mean trusting completely, would mean believing she deserved happiness, would mean accepting that she was more than her history, more than the sum of what had been done to her. And that was the most frightening thing of all. The next 3 days passed in tense alertness. Caleb and Eliza worked the ranch together, never straying far from weapons or from each other. They saw no sign of Pettigrew's men, but that somehow made it worse. The waiting, the not knowing, it wore on both of them. On the fourth day, Marshal Dawson arrived with unexpected news. Pettigrew's men cleared out, he announced, accepting the coffee Eliza offered. The ones who weren't arrested packed up and rode south. Apparently their boss was too broke to pay them, and they weren't inclined to stick around for revenge on credit. They're gone? All of them? Caleb asked. Everyone I could track. Of course, that doesn't mean they won't come back eventually, but for now, you're clear. Eliza felt tension she hadn't known she was carrying drained from her shoulders. And Pettigrew? Trial's in 2 weeks. Between the attempted kidnapping and the testimony about planned murder, he's looking at serious prison time. Maybe 10 years, maybe more. Dawson's expression hardened. Man made a lot of enemies over the years. Folks are lining up to testify against him. Will Eliza have to testify? Caleb asked. Dawson looked at her thoughtfully. Probably. But if she does, it'll be under protection. I'll make sure of that. Eliza nodded slowly. The thought of facing Pettigrew in court, of speaking publicly about what he'd done, filled her with dread. But it also represented something important, justice. The chance to hold him accountable, not just for attacking the ranch, but for years of cruelty. I'll do it, she said firmly. Whatever you need me to say, I'll say it. Dawson smiled approvingly. Brave woman. Holt, you did good bringing her here. After the marshal left, Caleb and Eliza stood in the yard, absorbing the news. The immediate danger had passed. They could breathe again. It's really over, Eliza said wonderingly. This part, yes. But there's still the trial, and the freedom papers are still processing. Caleb looked at her seriously. Are you sure you want to testify? It won't be easy, facing him again. I'm sure. If my testimony helps put him away, helps stop him from hurting anyone else, it's worth it. Eliza met his eyes. I'm done being afraid, Caleb. Done letting men like him control my life through fear. Caleb's expression softened with something that might have been pride. Then we'll face it together. You won't be alone in that courtroom. Thank you. They stood there for a moment, the autumn sun warm on their faces, the ranch peaceful around them. For the first time since the auction, Eliza allowed herself to imagine a future, one where she was truly free, where she could choose her own path, where maybe, just maybe, happiness was possible. And standing beside her, steady and solid and impossibly kind, was the man who'd made that future imaginable. The man who'd bought her freedom but given her so much more. The man she was falling in love with, whether she was ready for it or not. The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a strange sort of limbo. With the immediate threat gone, life at the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Almost. Because beneath the surface of daily routines, feeding cattle, mending fences, harvesting the last of the garden vegetables before frost, ran an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with Pettigrew and everything to do with the growing awareness between Eliza and Caleb. They were careful with each other now, in ways they hadn't been before. Careful not to stand too close. Careful not to let their hands brush when passing tools or plates. Careful not to acknowledge the way their eyes met and held for just a moment too long across the dinner table. It was exhausting. One afternoon, about a week before the trial, Eliza was in the kitchen making preserves from the last of the apples when Caleb came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway, watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. Smells good, he said finally. Should be ready by tonight. We'll have enough to last through winter. Eliza stirred the pot, focusing on the task to avoid looking at him. I was thinking I could make apple butter too, if there are enough left over. There are. The cellar's practically overflowing. He moved closer, and Eliza's pulse quickened despite herself. You've done amazing work with the garden and the preserving. I usually just eat salt pork and beans all winter. That's because you're terrible at planning ahead. Hey now. But he was smiling. I plan ahead. I just don't plan ahead for things like food variety. Clearly, Eliza finally looked up at him, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. Caleb, I need to talk to you about something, he said, his expression turning serious. Eliza's stomach dropped. Here it came. Whatever he'd been holding back, whatever was creating this tension between them, he was about to say it. All right. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat at the table, his hands clasped in front of him. The freedom papers came through. Marshall Dawson brought them by this morning while you were with the chickens. Eliza's hand stilled on the spoon. They're done? I'm free? Legally, yes. As of this morning, you're a free woman. No one owns you. No one can claim you as property. He pulled a folded document from his pocket and held it out. These are yours. Eliza's hands trembled as she took the papers, unfolding them with careful reverence. The legal language was dense and formal, but the meaning was clear. She was no longer enslaved. She was a person in the eyes of the law. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's only been 2 months. You said it would take much longer. Dawson pulled some strings, called in favors. He wanted to make sure you had legal protection before the trial, in case Pettigrew tried to claim you couldn't testify against your owner. Caleb's expression softened. You're really free, Eliza, completely free. The words should have brought joy, should have filled her with relief and triumph. Instead, Eliza felt a strange hollowness opening in her chest, because freedom meant choice, and choice meant deciding whether to stay or go. This is what you wanted, Caleb continued quietly. What you deserved. I'm happy for you. Thank you. Eliza folded the papers carefully, her mind racing. I need some air, excuse me. She fled to the porch, the autumn wind cool against her flushed face. Behind her, she heard Caleb stand but not follow, giving her space, as always, respecting her boundaries even when it must have confused him. Eliza stared out at the valley, at the ranch that had become more of a home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Free. She was actually free. She could leave right now, could walk away from this place and everyone in it, and no one could stop her. So why did the thought of leaving make her feel like she was tearing herself in half? Because you love him, you fool, she whispered to herself. The admission hung in the air, undeniable now that she had spoken it aloud. She loved Caleb Holt, loved his quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, his absolute refusal to treat her as anything less than human. Loved the way he made her coffee exactly how she liked it without asking. Loved how he listened when she spoke, really listened, like her words mattered. Loved the person she was becoming in his presence, stronger, braver, more herself than she'd ever been allowed to be. But love was terrifying. Love meant vulnerability. Love meant trusting someone with the power to destroy you. And Eliza had spent her entire life learning that trust was the most dangerous thing you could give. The door opened behind her, and Caleb stepped out. He didn't speak, just stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. I don't know what to do, Eliza said finally. About what? About this. About being free. About... She gestured helplessly at the ranch, at the space between them. Everything. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I don't know. I've never had to think about what I wanted before. Survival didn't leave room for wants. Then start small. He turned to face her. Do you want to leave the ranch? The question was direct, unflinching. Eliza appreciated that about him. He never danced around difficult topics. No, she admitted. I don't want to leave. Do you want to stay? I think so, but I don't know if I should. Why not? Eliza struggled to put her tangled emotions into words. Because staying means I'm choosing this, choosing you. And what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just confusing gratitude for something else? What if I'm staying because I'm afraid to be alone rather than because I actually want to be here? Caleb absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. Those are fair questions, and I can't answer them for you. Only you know what's in your heart. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. But I can tell you what's in mine, if you want to hear it. Eliza's breath caught. I want to hear it. I care about you, Eliza, deeply, more than I thought I could care about anyone after Sarah died. His voice was low, earnest. When I bought you at that auction, I did it because it was the right thing to do. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about doing the right thing and started being about you, about who you are, your strength, your resilience, Your refusal to let cruelty break your spirit. I admire you. And he took a breath. I love you. I don't expect you to feel the same way. I just wanted you to know. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Eliza felt tears prickling her eyes. I'm terrified, she whispered. I know. I don't know how to do this, how to be loved, how to trust it. I know that too. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. So we figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty and time and seeing where it leads. Eliza looked down at their joined hands. His was calloused and strong, marked by years of hard work. Hers was smaller, scarred from labor and old injuries. Together, they looked right. They looked like they fit. I think I love you too, she said, the words feeling foreign but true. But I'm scared of what that means. Love doesn't have to mean surrendering yourself. It can mean becoming more yourself, with someone who sees and values who you are. Caleb's thumb brushed across her knuckles. I don't want to own you, Eliza. I already tried that, and it felt wrong from the start. I just want to be with you, as equals, as partners, if that's what you want too. I do want that. I'm just not sure I know how. Then we learned together. They stood there on the porch, hands clasped as the sun sank lower in the sky. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, wasn't a sweeping romantic gesture. It was quiet and tentative and uncertain. But somehow that made it more real, more honest. Can I ask you something? Eliza said after a while. Anything. That day at the auction, when you bid on me, was there any part of you that hoped for this, that saw me and thought about more than just helping? Caleb considered this carefully. Honestly, no. I saw a woman in desperate need and I reacted. The feelings came later as I got to know you. If I'd bought you with romantic intentions, that would have been another kind of violation. But this, what's growing between us now, this is built on choice and mutual respect. That's the difference. Eliza nodded, understanding. I'm glad it happened this way, even though it's terrifying. The best things usually are. They went inside as the light faded, and Eliza finished the preserves while Caleb prepared dinner. The domestic routine felt different now, charged with new meaning. Every small interaction, passing a knife, brushing shoulders while reaching for spices, sharing smiles over minor mishaps, carried weight. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and for the first time, Eliza let herself lean against Caleb's shoulder. He stiffened in surprise, then relaxed, his arm coming around her carefully. Is this all right? He asked. Yes. Eliza closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and leather that meant safety. This is all right. They sat that way for a long time, watching flames dance in the hearth, neither speaking. Words weren't necessary. This quiet intimacy, the simple act of choosing to be close, said everything that needed saying. The trial came faster than Eliza was ready for. The morning dawned cold and gray, frost covering the ground in a crystalline blanket. Caleb helped her into the wagon, and they made the journey to town in tense silence. Eliza had dressed in her nicest outfit, a simple but well-made dress in deep green that she'd sewn herself, and pinned her hair up carefully. She wanted to look dignified, capable, like someone whose testimony mattered. The courthouse was packed. News of the trial had spread throughout the territory, drawing curious onlookers and those with grievances against Pettigrew. Marshal Dawson met them at the door. You ready for this? He asked Eliza. As ready as I'll ever be. Good. Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do. He glanced at Caleb. You can sit in the gallery, but you can't speak or interfere. I understand. They entered the courtroom, and Eliza's eyes immediately found Pettigrew. He sat at the defendant's table, his injured hand bandaged, his face haggard. When he saw her, his expression twisted with hatred so pure it made her flinch. Caleb's hand found hers, squeezing gently. I'm right here. You're safe. The judge entered, a stern-looking man in his 60s, and called the court to order. The prosecutor laid out the charges: attempted kidnapping, assault with intent to harm, conspiracy to commit murder. Each charge was supported by testimony from Pettigrew's hired men, who turned on their former employer in exchange for reduced sentences. Then it was Eliza's turn. The prosecution calls Eliza Monroe to the stand. Eliza's legs felt like water as she stood. The walk to the witness stand seemed to take forever. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. She could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their speculation about who she was and what she'd endured. She was sworn in and sat, her hands clenched in her lap to hide their trembling. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Wells, approached with a kind expression. "Miss Monroe, can you tell the court how you came to know Augustus Pettigrew?" Eliza took a breath. "He owned me. I was enslaved on his plantation for 3 years. And during those 3 years, how were you treated?" "I was worked from dawn to dusk in the fields, fed minimally, beaten for minor infractions." Eliza's voice remained steady, though each word cost her. "And I was—" she faltered. "Take your time," Wells said gently. "I was violated, repeatedly, by Mr. Pettigrew and others he allowed access to me." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel for silence. "And when you became pregnant," Wells continued, "what happened?" "Mr. Pettigrew decided I was more valuable sold than kept. He sent me to auction immediately after I gave birth." "How soon after?" "Hours. I delivered my daughter in a holding pen. They didn't even let me name her before selling her separately." More murmurs. Eliza saw several women in the gallery wiping their eyes. "And at this auction, who purchased you?" "Caleb Holt." Eliza's eyes found him in the crowd. He nodded encouragingly. "For how much?" $300. "That's quite a sum. Why do you think Mr. Holt paid so much?" Pettigrew's lawyer objected. "Speculation." "Sustained," the judge ruled. Wells changed tack. "After Mr. Holt purchased you, what happened?" "He took me to his ranch, gave me medical care, food, a safe place to recover. He treated me with dignity and respect." "Did he force himself on you in any way?" "No, never." "Did he restrict your movement or keep you imprisoned?" "No. He told me from the beginning that I was free to leave whenever I chose." "And yet you stayed. Why?" Eliza chose her words carefully. "Because for the first time in my life, I was treated like a human being. Because Mr. Holt showed me what freedom could actually mean. Not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, of respect, of safety." Wells nodded. "Now, can you describe what happened when Mr. Pettigrew came to the ranch?" Eliza recounted the confrontation in detail. Pettigrew's threats, the hired guns, the violence that erupted. She described shooting Pettigrew's hand, defending Caleb, refusing to surrender to men who would have dragged her back into slavery, or worse. "And when you fired at Mr. Pettigrew, what were you thinking?" "That I was done being property, done being afraid. That if I had to fight for my freedom, I would." No further questions. Pettigrew's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was a weaselly man with calculating eyes. "Miss Monroe, you claim you were violated on Mr. Pettigrew's plantation. Do you have any proof of these allegations?" Eliza's jaw tightened. "My word is my proof." "The word of a former slave against a respected landowner? That's hardly compelling evidence." "Objection!" Wells was on her feet. "The witness's legal status is irrelevant to the truth of her testimony." "Sustained. Counselor, watch yourself." The lawyer tried a different approach. "You shot my client, causing permanent injury to his hand. That sounds like assault to me." "I defended myself and Mr. Holt from armed men who came to do us harm." "Or perhaps you were following Mr. Holt's orders. After all, you say he owns you." "He doesn't own me," Eliza interrupted, her voice ringing clear. "I'm a free woman. My papers were processed and approved before this trial began. I'm here by choice, testifying by choice, because what your client did was wrong, and I won't stay silent about it anymore." The lawyer blinked, thrown off his rhythm. That is, no further questions." Eliza stepped down, her legs shaking with relief. She'd done it. She'd faced Pettigrew in open court and told the truth. Whatever happened now, she'd spoken her piece. The trial continued for another hour with additional witnesses and closing arguments. Finally, the judge instructed the jury and sent them to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. Eliza and Caleb sat in a small anteroom, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Marshal Dawson brought them coffee, and Eliza wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for its warmth. "You did well up there," Caleb said quietly. "I'm proud of you." "I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." He covered her hand with his. "You were incredibly brave." 2 hours later, the jury returned. Eliza's heart pounded as everyone filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood, a weathered rancher with kind eyes. "On the charge of attempted kidnapping, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of assault with intent to harm?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder?" "Guilty." Relief flooded through Eliza so powerfully she nearly collapsed. "Guilty. On all charges." Pettigrew would go to prison for years. He couldn't hurt her anymore, couldn't hurt anyone. The judge sentenced him to 15 years at the territorial prison to be served consecutively. Pettigrew's face went white, then red, then purple with rage. As guards led him away, he turned and spat toward Eliza. "This isn't over. You hear me? You'll pay for this, both of you." The guards dragged him out, his threats echoing until the doors closed behind him. "It is over," Marshal Dawson said, approaching Eliza and Caleb. "He's done. And even if he weren't, you have the law on your side now. Both of you." Eliza nodded, overwhelmed by the finality of it. Pettigrew was gone. Truly gone. The nightmare that had haunted her for 3 years was finally, definitively over. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the morning's tension. This was peaceful, reflective. Eliza watched the landscape pass, seeing it with new eyes. She was free to appreciate its beauty now, without the shadow of Pettigrew hanging over her. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked. "That I can actually plan for the future now. Real plans, not just survival." "What kind of plans?" Eliza considered this. "I want to learn to read better. I can manage basic words, but I want to read books, real books." She glanced at him. "Would you teach me?" "I'd be honored. And I want to help more with the ranch. Not just the household tasks, but the actual ranching. Cattle management, breeding decisions, financial planning. I want to be a real partner." Caleb's expression softened. "You already are a partner, Eliza. But I'd love to teach you more about the operations." They reached the ranch as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. As they unhitched the horses, Eliza felt a sense of homecoming so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This place, this life, this man, she'd chosen them, and they'd chosen her back. That evening, after a simple dinner, they sat on the porch watching stars emerge. Caleb had brought out blankets against the cold, and they huddled together sharing warmth. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said. "Always." "What happens now? With us, I mean." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to happen?" "I want—" Eliza gathered her courage. "I want to stay. Not as a guest. Not as someone you're helping. I want to build a life here. With you. If that's what you want too." "It's exactly what I want." Caleb turned to face her, his expression serious. "But I want to do this right, Eliza. No rushing, no pressure. We take our time, figure out what this partnership looks like, build something solid." "What does doing it right look like?" "It looks like courting you properly. Taking you to town dances, bringing you flowers, earning your trust day by day. It looks like asking you to marry me when you're ready, if you're ever ready, and meaning it as a true partnership, not an obligation." He took her hand. "I want you to choose me every day, knowing you could choose differently. That's what love should be." Eliza felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I think I'd like that. The courting, the partnership, all of it." She paused. "But Caleb, I've already chosen you. Every day since the trial ended, I've been choosing you. I just needed time to realize it. And now? Now I'm choosing you consciously, deliberately, because I love you and because you showed me what love could actually mean." Caleb's smile was radiant, transforming his normally serious face. "Then I guess we're doing this." "I guess we are." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Eliza felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. This was home. Not the ranch, not the house, but this. Being with someone who saw her, valued her, loved her for exactly who she was. The months that followed were the happiest of Eliza's life. Caleb courted her with old-fashioned earnestness, bringing her wildflowers from the meadow, teaching her to read from his small library, taking her to town socials where they danced awkwardly and laughed at their own missteps. They worked the ranch together, partners in every sense, and Eliza discovered she had a talent for cattle management that surprised them both. She also began to heal in ways she hadn't known she needed to. The nightmares about Grace became less frequent, evolving from sources of pure grief into bittersweet memories. She would always carry the loss, always wonder where her daughter was and what kind of life she was living. But the wondering no longer consumed her. She could hold Grace in her heart while still moving forward with her own life. One spring evening, nearly a year after the trial, Caleb asked Eliza to marry him. They were in the garden she'd expanded, surrounded by the first green shoots of new vegetables, and his proposal was simple and heartfelt. I love you, Eliza Monroe. I love your strength, your kindness, your refusal to let the world make you bitter. I love the life we've built together. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner, your equal, your husband? Eliza didn't hesitate. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married in a simple ceremony in town with Marshall Dawson as a witness and half the town in attendance. Eliza wore a dress she'd made herself from blue calico, and Caleb wore his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face. As they exchanged vows, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the auction platform to this moment, from property to person to partner, from despair to hope to love. I, Eliza Monroe, take you, Caleb Holt, to be my husband, she said clearly. I choose you, today and every day after. And in choosing him, she chose herself, chose freedom, chose life, chose everything she'd never been allowed to have and everything she'd almost stopped believing was possible. The past would always be part of her. The scars, the losses, the pain, they'd shaped who she was, but they didn't define who she would become. That was her choice to make now. And she chose joy, she chose partnership, she chose love. She chose the future, bright and open and entirely her own. The first year of marriage brought changes to the ranch that transformed it from a lonely bachelor's property into a true homestead. Eliza expanded the garden until it produced more vegetables than two people could eat, selling the surplus in town and building a modest savings account in her own name. Caleb taught her everything he knew about cattle breeding and ranch management, and she proved to have an instinct for it that impressed even the old-timers who initially dismissed her as just another wife playing at ranching. But it was the small moments that defined their life together. Morning coffee shared on the porch while watching sunrise paint the mountains. Evening conversations by the fire where they discussed everything from cattle prices to philosophy. The way Caleb's hand always found hers when they walked. The way Eliza's laughter, once so rare, now filled the house with warmth. 2 years into their marriage, on a cold November morning, Eliza woke feeling nauseated. She made it to the basin just in time, retching until her stomach was empty. Caleb appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. Are you all right? Should I fetch the doctor? Eliza wiped her mouth with a shaking hand, her mind racing. She'd felt this way before, knew exactly what it meant. No, I think I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb's expression cycled through surprise, joy, and then immediate concern as he remembered what pregnancy had cost her before. Are you... He moved closer, kneeling beside her. How do you feel about that? Eliza took a shaky breath, examining her own emotions with the honesty she'd learned from him. Terrified. But also... hopeful? Is that strange? No, it's not strange at all. He took her hand gently. This is different, Eliza. You're free. You're safe. This child will be ours, raised here, loved and protected. Nothing like before. I know, but I can't help remembering Grace, wondering if this is somehow betraying her memory. You could never betray her. Loving another child doesn't diminish what you feel for her. Hearts expand, they don't divide. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. And maybe this child is a gift, a chance to experience motherhood the way it should be, with joy instead of fear. Eliza nodded, tears streaming down her face. I want this baby. I do. I'm just scared. Then we'll be scared together, and we'll get through it together, just like everything else. The pregnancy progressed slowly through winter and into spring. Eliza's body remembered what to do, even as her mind wrestled with memories of Grace. Caleb was attentive without being overbearing, anticipating her needs, making sure she rested, bringing her tea when the morning sickness was bad. Dr. Harmon, a kindly woman who'd moved to town the previous year, examined Eliza regularly. "You're healthy and strong," she assured them. "Everything looks good. This baby should arrive right on schedule in early June." As Eliza's belly swelled with new life, she found herself talking to the baby, telling it about the ranch, about its father, about the life they were building. And sometimes, late at night when Caleb was asleep, she whispered about Grace, about the sister this child would never meet, but who would always be part of their family story. One afternoon in May, Eliza was hanging laundry when a wagon crested the ridge. She shaded her eyes, watching it approach with the wariness that never quite left her. Caleb emerged from the barn, his hand moving instinctively toward where his rifle leaned against the doorframe. But as the wagon drew closer, Eliza recognized the driver. Marshall Dawson. "Wasn't expecting you," Caleb called out as the wagon stopped. "Everything all right?" Dawson climbed down, his expression unreadable. "That depends. Can we talk inside?" They settled around the kitchen table, and Dawson accepted the coffee Eliza offered. He took a long drink, clearly gathering his thoughts. "I have news about Pettigrew," he said finally. Eliza's hand went instinctively to her belly. "What about him?" "He died 3 days ago. Prison fever took him." The words settled over the room like snow. Eliza waited for some reaction, relief, triumph, satisfaction, but all she felt was a strange emptiness. The man who'd caused her so much pain was gone, and his death meant nothing. He couldn't hurt her anymore, but he'd already lost the power to do that years ago when she'd fought back. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked quietly. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel more." Eliza looked at Dawson. "Is that strange?" "No. Revenge and closure aren't the same thing. You already had your closure when you testified. His death is just an ending." Dawson shifted uncomfortably. "But there's more." When they went through his effects, they found records, sales records, including the one for your daughter. Eliza's breath caught. "Grace?" "The couple who bought her were named Morrison, Jonathan and Emma Morrison, heading east to Ohio. They had no children of their own, wanted to raise her as theirs." Dawson pulled out a worn piece of paper. "This was in Pettigrew's files, an address in Cincinnati." Eliza's hands trembled as she took the paper. An address. After 4 years of wondering, of hoping, of grieving, she had an actual lead. Grace could be alive, could be living at this address, could be a little girl now, walking and talking, and "It's 4 years old," Caleb said gently, reading the paper over her shoulder. "They might have moved, but they might not have." Eliza looked at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "We could find her. We could actually find her." Caleb glanced at her swollen belly. "You're 7 months pregnant, Eliza. The journey to Ohio would take weeks, maybe longer. It's not safe." "I know, but after the baby comes," she looked at Dawson, "would you help us? Help us find her?" The marshal nodded slowly. "I can send telegrams, make inquiries, see if the Morrisons are still at that address. If they are, if your daughter is with them." He paused. "What then, Eliza? What are you hoping for?" It was a fair question. Eliza had spent years imagining finding Grace, but she'd never thought past the finding. "I just want to know she's all right, that she's loved and cared for. I'm not trying to take her from a good home. I just need to know." "Fair enough. I'll start making inquiries this week." After Dawson left, Eliza and Caleb sat in silence, the weight of possibility heavy between them. "Are you sure about this?" Caleb asked finally. "Finding her might be harder than not knowing." "I have to try. Even if it hurts, even if she doesn't remember me, I have to know she's safe." Eliza placed her hand over his on her belly. "And I want this child to know about their sister, to understand their family history, even the painful parts. Then we'll find her, together." The baby came on a warm June evening, arriving with the sunset. This time, Eliza labored in her own bed with Dr. Harmon attending and Caleb holding her hand. This time, there were no chains, no auction platform waiting. This time, when her daughter, another daughter, a second chance, emerged crying into the world, Eliza got to hold her immediately. "She's perfect," Caleb breathed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter. "She is." Eliza counted tiny fingers and toes, memorized the little face, breathed in the scent of new life. "Hello, Sarah. We've been waiting for you." They'd chosen the name together, honoring Caleb's first wife while creating something new. Sarah Grace Holt, a bridge between past and future. In the days after Sarah's birth, as Eliza recovered and learned to nurse this baby she was allowed to keep, Marshall Dawson returned with news. "Found them. The Morrisons are still in Cincinnati. They have a daughter named Margaret, age 4, who they adopted as an infant." He paused. "I didn't tell them who was asking. Figured you'd want to make contact yourself." Eliza's heart hammered. Margaret. Grace had a name now, had a life. Did they say, "Is she well? Happy?" From what I could gather, yes. The Morrisons are good people, school teachers, both of them. They've given her a stable home. Relief flooded through Eliza, so powerful it made her dizzy. Grace was alive, was safe, was loved. That was all she'd needed to know. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding her." That night, with the newborn Sarah sleeping peacefully in her cradle and Caleb's arm around her shoulders, Eliza wrote a letter. It took hours to compose, finding the right words to explain who she was and what she wanted. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Morrison," she wrote, "I am the birth mother of the child you know as Margaret. I have no wish to disrupt your family or claim any parental rights. I simply wanted you to know that she came from love, even if circumstances were tragic. I hope she is happy and healthy. I hope she knows she is cherished. If you feel it appropriate when she is older, please tell her that her birth mother named her Grace, and that not a day has passed without me thinking of her. I am remarried now, with a family of my own, but she will always hold a piece of my heart. I wish you all every happiness. With gratitude, Eliza Monroe Holt." She sent the letter through Dawson, not expecting a response, but 2 months later, one came. "Dear Mrs. Holt," Emma Morrison wrote, "your letter moved us deeply. Margaret is indeed happy and healthy. She is bright and curious, loving and kind. We have told her she is adopted, and when she is old enough to understand, we will share your letter with her. Please know that we are raising her with love and giving her every opportunity. She is learning to read already and loves stories about horses. Thank you for the gift of her life and for trusting us to raise her. We will make sure she knows she was wanted by both her birth mother and her adoptive parents. Should you ever wish to meet her when she is older, we would not oppose it, but we leave that decision to her when she is ready to make it. With respect and gratitude, Emma and Jonathan Morrison." Eliza read the letter through tears, then read it to Caleb, then folded it carefully and placed it in the lockbox where she kept her freedom papers and other precious documents. Grace, Margaret, was loved, was being educated, had a good life. That was more than Eliza had dared hope for. "Are you at peace with this?" Caleb asked, watching her cradle Sarah. "As much as I can be. I'll always wonder about her, always wish things had been different, but knowing she's safe and loved, that's enough." Eliza smiled down at her infant daughter. "And I have Sarah now. I get to be a mother the way I always wanted to be." The years unfolded like pages in a book. Sarah grew from infant to toddler to curious child, filling the ranch house with laughter and questions. Eliza and Caleb had 2 more children, a son they named Thomas after Caleb's first son, and another daughter they called Clara. The ranch prospered, expanding to include more cattle and eventually a small herd of horses that became Sarah's passion. Eliza became known in the community not just as Caleb Holt's wife, but as a force in her own right. She helped establish a school in town, taught reading to anyone who wanted to learn, and quietly assisted other freed people in establishing themselves in the territory. Her past, rather than being something to hide, became a source of strength. She spoke openly about her experiences, not to dwell on them, but to help others understand and to fight against the systems that had oppressed her. When Sarah was 12 and starting to ask questions about where she came from, Eliza told her the whole story about Grace, about the auction, about Caleb's intervention, and the fight for freedom. Sarah listened with wide eyes, then hugged her mother fiercely. "You're the bravest person I know," she said. "No, I'm just someone who refused to give up. There's a difference." "I don't think so." One autumn afternoon, when Sarah was 15, a letter arrived from Ohio. Margaret Morrison, now nearly 20, had written to Eliza. "Dear Mrs. Holt," or should I say mother, I'm not sure what to call you. "My parents showed me your letters when I turned 18, and I've spent the past 2 years trying to decide if I wanted to make contact. I think I do. I'd like to know you, if you're willing. I'd like to understand where I came from. My parents have given me a wonderful life, and I love them dearly. But there's a piece of me that's always wondered about you. Would you be willing to meet? I could travel west, or if you prefer, we could exchange letters first. Whatever you're comfortable with. Your daughter, Margaret Grace Morrison." Eliza's hand shook as she read. Grace, Margaret, wanted to meet her. After all these years, after all the loss and longing, her first daughter was reaching out. "What do you think?" she asked Caleb, showing him the letter. "I think you should invite her here. Let her see the life you've built, meet her siblings, understand your story in context. What if she hates me for giving her up? You didn't give her up. She was taken from you. There's a difference, and I suspect she's smart enough to understand that." So Eliza wrote back, extending an invitation. Margaret arrived 6 months later, in the spring of her 21st year. She was tall and graceful, with Eliza's eyes and cheekbones, but a confidence Eliza had never possessed at that age. The reunion was awkward at first, two strangers trying to navigate a relationship that should have been, but wasn't. But over the course of Margaret's month-long visit, something beautiful emerged. Not quite a mother-daughter relationship in the traditional sense, but a connection nonetheless. Margaret met her half-siblings and was enchanted by them, especially Sarah, who peppered her with questions about city life. She learned to ride horses, helped with the ranch work, and spent long evenings hearing Eliza's stories. On her last night at the ranch, Margaret and Eliza sat on the porch watching stars emerge. "Thank you for letting me come," Margaret said quietly. "Thank you for wanting to. I need you to know something." Margaret turned to face her. "I don't blame you for what happened. I understand now that you had no choice, and I'm grateful that you made sure I went to a good home, even if you couldn't keep me yourself. I didn't make sure of anything. I had no power then. But you wrote to my parents. You told them I came from love. That mattered to them, and it matters to me." Margaret took Eliza's hand. "You gave me life twice. Once when you bore me, and once when you let me go to people who could give me opportunities you couldn't. That's not abandonment. That's love." Eliza wept then, years of guilt and grief finally releasing. "I've always loved you, even when I didn't know where you were or who you'd become. You were always in my heart. I know, I can feel it." When Margaret left to return to Ohio, where she was studying to become a teacher like her adoptive parents, Eliza felt a sense of completion she'd never expected. Grace, Margaret, had a good life, had become a remarkable woman, and she bore no resentment toward the mother who'd been forced to let her go. The years continued their march. Sarah married a rancher from the next valley and started her own family. Thomas became a lawyer fighting for the rights of freed people in other marginalized communities. Clara, the youngest, chose to stay at the ranch, working alongside Caleb and Eliza to build it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Eliza and Caleb grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They sat together on the porch every evening, even in winter, wrapped in blankets and watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They'd built something lasting, something that would outlive them both. When Caleb was 72, a stroke took him suddenly. He died in his sleep, peacefully, in the bed he'd shared with Eliza for 45 years. The grief was crushing, even though Eliza had known it was coming. He'd been her anchor, her partner, her proof that goodness existed in the world. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half the territory, Eliza stood and spoke about the man he'd been. "Caleb Holt saved my life," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "But more than that, he taught me that I was worth saving. He showed me that strength isn't about domination, but about using your power to lift others up. He proved that love doesn't require ownership, that partnership is built on respect, and that freedom is meaningless without the support to exercise it. He was my husband, my friend, my teacher, and my home. And though he's gone, everything he built, this ranch, this family, this community, will carry on because of the foundation he laid. In the years after Caleb's death, Eliza continued to run the ranch with Clara's help. She was in her 70s now, her hair silver, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her spirit as fierce as ever. She spent her mornings working with the horses, her afternoons with grandchildren, her evenings writing letters to Margaret and reading the books she'd learned to love. One morning, 30 years after Caleb's death, Eliza woke feeling tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. She was 96 years old, had lived a life beyond anything she could have imagined on that rain-soaked auction platform. She'd been a slave, a mother, a wife, a rancher, a teacher, a grandmother, a friend. She'd loved and lost and loved again. She'd fought for her freedom and then spent the rest of her life helping others find theirs. Clara found her that afternoon, sitting in Caleb's rocking chair on the porch, a peaceful smile on her face. She'd simply closed her eyes and slipped away, surrounded by the mountains she'd come to love and the land she'd helped build. The funeral was attended by 4 generations of family and countless community members whose lives Eliza had touched. Margaret came from Ohio, now a white-haired grandmother herself. Sarah's children and grandchildren filled the front rows. Thomas delivered the eulogy, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother was sold for $300, he said. That was her worth in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of men who saw her as property. But her true worth can't be measured in currency. It's measured in the lives she changed, the injustices she fought, the love she gave freely, and the legacy she leaves behind. She taught us that survival isn't enough, that we must live with dignity, with purpose, with love. She showed us that the past shapes us but doesn't define us, that freedom is something we must claim and then defend, and that family is built not just on blood, but on choice and commitment." They buried Eliza beside Caleb on a hill overlooking the ranch, where she could see the valley stretch out in all directions. The headstone was simple: Eliza Monroe Holt, 1843 to 1939. Once enslaved, always free. Beloved wife, mother, and fighter for justice. But Eliza's real legacy wasn't carved in stone. It lived in her children and grandchildren who carried forward her strength and compassion. It lived in the school she'd helped establish, still teaching children 70 years later. It lived in the ranch that bore her touch in every building and fence line. It lived in the stories people told about the woman who'd been bought and sold, but who'd refused to let that define her. Margaret stood at the grave long after the others had left, Clara beside her. "Did you know her well?" Clara asked gently. "Not as well as I would have liked, but well enough to understand what she gave me." Margaret touched the headstone. "She gave me life. And then she let me go because she loved me enough to want better for me than she could provide. That's the greatest gift a mother can give. She never stopped loving you or talking about you." "I know, just like she never stopped loving all of you." Margaret smiled through her tears. "She had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. Big enough to hold all of us, all our stories, all our pain and joy." As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the 2 women stood together, bound by a mother who'd been torn from one and chosen by the other, united in their grief and their gratitude. Eliza Monroe had been born into slavery, had been bought and sold like livestock, had lost her first child and endured horrors that would have broken most people. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd thrived. She'd built a life defined not by what had been done to her, but by what she'd chosen to become. She'd been property. She'd become a person. She'd transformed from survivor to mother to partner to pillar of her community. Her journey had started on an auction platform in chains, bleeding and broken, believing her spirit had finally died. It had ended on a porch overlooking land she'd helped build, surrounded by love she'd earned and given freely, having lived a life so full and rich that $300 seemed like the cruel joke it had always been. Because you can't measure a human life in currency. You measure it in love given and received, in battles fought and won, in children raised and communities strengthened, in moments of grace amid suffering, in the choice to keep living when giving up would be easier, in the legacy left behind when the final chapter closes. By those measures, Eliza Munro Holt was priceless, and her story, a story of resilience, love, and the unbreakable human spirit, would echo through generations, reminding everyone who heard it that freedom is never given. It must be claimed, defended, and shared. That was Eliza's final gift to the world, the understanding that no matter how dark the beginning, we all have the power to write our own ending. And hers was beautiful,